right, and we are back with Dr. Antonio Graceffo. I hope you're not superstitious because this is podcast number 13.
Is it really?
It really is.
Can we shut off the mic and start again, and then it'll be 14?
We could.
Could we count the sound check as a podcast?
All right, let's do it. Podcast number 14, the sound check, which I will air as podcast number 13, just to skip out on that superstitious moment right there.
We dodged a bullet on that one.
Yes, we did. All right. Welcome to podcast number 14.
I'm really glad to be here on podcast number 14. Thank you.
Sweet. Yeah. So, man, we chatted a little bit before the podcast. So you are a doctor of Wushu, is that correct?
Yes, yeah. I graduated from Shanghai University of Sport with a PhD in Wushu. And then so inside of Wushu, there's there's 5 potential majors. There's Ballet, Toehold, which is what do you call that in English? Like performance martial art?
Yeah.
There's Sanda, there's wrestling, and there's movie kung fu, and there's Tai Chi. And I majored in wrestling.
Oh, wow. That is really interesting. Man, it was fascinating to me when I first learned that you could get a college degree in something other than a purely scholastic field. For example, I've got a degree in modern dance, which blows a lot of people's minds. They'll often ask me, "Well, what are you supposed to do with that?" And my answer is dance,
or become an MMA instructor,
or become an MMA coach or fighter or something like that, because it's basically the same thing.
It's the same thing,
except in MMA the dancers hit each other and that sort of thing. So man, what is it like? What do you do with a degree in Wushu?
The process, basically, PhDs in China are generally 4 years. I tested out of the year 1, so it was a 3-year. Mine was 3 years. Passed the first exam, but it's like any other PhD. You come in, you do your proposal for your research. There's a panel of professors, and they approve your research. But there's also then a physical component. So you got to pass a martial arts exam to get in, and then each year you did martial arts exams to monitor your progress. And you have a coursework in a PhD in China is insane. Like my first year, I was so busy. I did as much coursework probably my first year of my PhD in China as I did in like my whole bachelor's degree. Like it was just an insane amount of coursework. But a lot of it was also like getting up in the morning and going to wrestling practice. Like you go to wrestling practice and then you're like all beat up, and then you go sit in a lecture in Chinese for 3 hours, and then you go like to Sanda practice, and then you go to another lecture, and then
Oh man, that's interesting. So a big flip flop between lectures and fight training, basically.
Yeah, it's really funny, and a lot of people. It was pretty funny because. So the whole program's taught in Chinese, right? So you're sitting there and you're in lectures, and it's sometimes pretty boring. So your mind wanders. It's like being in one of those sensory deprivation tanks. Like your mind just goes places it probably shouldn't. So I'm just going around the room going, I notice a lot of people just just put on their like training clothes in the morning, and they just wear that all day. Because you're in and out of training and in and out of the classroom all day. And I would like run home and shower and come back and whatever. But that was like a pretty funny thing. And then usually like Sanda classes would be at night. At night you didn't have academic classes, but at night we had Sanda. So I had a wrestling major, and then if you were going to call it a minor, it would be Sanda.
Okay.
Yeah, and then for my research on wrestling, I also did some judo because I basically wanted to look at every kind of sort of, every form of grappling basically, except jiu-jitsu, because it's way too far away from what I was actually researching.
Yeah. Now, a question I get a lot from my viewers on YouTube, because they're always asking me about Chinese martial arts since we live in China here, and it's what do I think about Chinese folk wrestling basically, and it's not something I have a lot of experience with, but you do.
Yeah. So I was on the Chinese traditional wrestling team at the university. So Chinese traditional wrestling, you wear a uniform very similar to judo. Except that the jacket is short sleeved. And interestingly, so I did some judo research as part of my dissertation.
Yeah.
And very interestingly, is the original judo uniform was also short sleeved.
That's right. They also had shorter legs. It was almost like long shorts.
Yeah, the short legs, I always think that's kind of a cheating thing that, because a lot of my judo friends, so like one of my best friends at the university, Lukai, he's a judo major, right? And I would always, every time I saw him, it looked like his pants were getting a little higher. And I think they just did that so that there was less to grab, you know? But Jigoro Kano, the founder of judo, if you look at the uniform he wore, it was actually short sleeve. In Chinese wrestling, you're allowed to grip inside the sleeve, which I believe you're not allowed to do in judo.
Yeah, it's a foul in judo and also Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, in Chinese wrestling, there's 7 standard grips. You're actually allowed to do any grip you want, but there's 7 standard grips, and several of them involve either putting your hand inside the sleeve, inside the lapel, which I guess you can also do in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
But you're allowed to grab in the back of the collar, which I don't know if you're allowed to do that in jiu-jitsu. If your hand, your fingers can actually go.
In jiu-jitsu, yeah. I think they have some stipulations in judo, and the rules keep changing, so I'm not familiar with what the current rule set is, but there are very specific ways you're supposed to grab the collar.
And it may also be a safety thing, because one of the reasons, so like in Chinese wrestling, in theory, you were allowed to grip any way you wanted, but they would advise against doing other grips, and it was a lot of it was safety. They just figured out that, you know, if your fingers are wrapped up a certain way and you get thrown, it's going to break all your fingers, right? So, but interestingly, Chinese wrestling, you can grip inside the sleeve, grip inside the lapel, grip inside the collar. You can grip under the belt. Oh, that's the other thing. I don't know if you're allowed to grip the belt in all the other sports, but you're allowed to grip under the belt from the bottom, from the top, and from behind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Plus all wrestling things. So you're allowed single leg, double leg takedowns. You're allowed body locks. You're allowed anything that's wrestling related. So what happened at the university was Chinese traditional wrestling normally would be part of Wushu, and it would be a traditional art form. And if you go to Beijing, like I went to wrestling school in Beijing, and it's like old guys teaching this traditional art. And in fact, in Beijing, the guys that I train under, Wang Wenyong is the master, but they actually call their art Kung Fu wrestling. And it's because to them, this is a traditional art form that goes back, you know, hundreds of years, thousands of years. At the sport university, it's more of a competitive sport. And in fact, our team at the sport university were all the guys who got cut from the Greco-Roman team.
Oh, really?
On the whole team, there was only one guy that grew up in a sports school. So I don't know if the viewers know. Is this interesting for people to know about sports schools?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so in China, they have a sports school system. So if you go to a normal school, like elementary, junior high school, whatever, there's no sports teams and there's almost no sport training at all.
Right.
So all the Olympic athletes basically come through this system they call sports school. So from elementary school, there's selections, and they select the kids based on how their body looks. You know, if he has big feet, they might put him in the swimming program, and if he's fat, they put him in the wrestling program, and if they're really long, they put him in the taekwondo. And they actually have these scouts that go out to villages, you know, and like look at the kids and give them tests and whatever, and then they'll put them in a sports school based on what they think they should be doing. So my teammates, wrestling teammates, mostly had been identified between age 9 and 12. And then they'd gone to a wrestling school or a sports school, and they majored in wrestling, and they just lived in a sports school like their whole lives. And then at some point during high school, when you start competing for national titles, if you win a national title at, say, 15 years old or so, like toward the middle of high school, if you win a national title or even like a silver medal, they might give you early admission to a sports university, and you would actually leave your high school. You'd actually never finish high school. You leave your high school, you go live at a sports university, you live with the team, and you train full-time. This does not mean that you're accepted to the university, which is really a weird thing. So there's guys who did this.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
And then when it came time for actual university admissions, they weren't accepted.
Wow.
And then their career just ends.
So they kind of put their whole lives on the line for that chance to get into the university and put everything on hold, and if it doesn't pan out, they're
basically just turned out on the street.
Wow.
And so they have testing at that point where you test into the university. So like I was at a sports university, so there's 2 ways you can get in. You can get in through the academic track or through the sport professional, they call it professional track. So I went in through the academic track. A lot of my teammates went in, most of them, all of my teammates went in through the professional track. So what they would do at that point, they would test. If you win national titles when you're like 17 or 18, there's a good chance because you get points for everything you do. They give you points,
Right.
and then you take a written exam. But you might come into the written exam and know that you only need to score like 10% or 15% on the written exam, and you have so many points from other stuff, from winning championships and stuff.
I'm just silencing my phone right here just in case it goes off.
And there was one kid, a Sanda fighter named Dong Hai, and he had won so many competitions that he knew that he was going to be accepted to the sports university. That was already a given. And but anyway, so they go in through this sports track, and then they get on the professional team at the university, and then they just wrestle and compete. And again, you could get cut from the team, right? And there's guys that get cut from the team, and they're just out on the street.
Yeah. So I've got a question about the wrestling program at these sports universities. Is it all like Chinese traditional folk wrestling, or is it also freestyle, Greco-Roman? So
the sports school system, the whole system throughout China, including the universities, has all the Olympic sports because they have to train, the athletes for the Olympics. This is where the national teams come from. The national teams are generally at the Beijing Sport University, which is number one. Yeah. Shanghai's number two. Shanghai's number two in performance, but we're number one in academics in terms of like research. But anyway, Beijing's where most of the national level teams go. So they have all the Olympic sports. Then they've always had, and then the Chinese sports. That's what I was going to say. They have all the Olympic sports and the Chinese sports. So that would be Wushu. And Shanghai University of Sports, the only one that offers a PhD in Wushu. But they have a Wushu major at other universities. And Shanghai University of Sport also has the Ping Pong College, which is the only place in the world where you can get a degree in ping pong.
That's kind of awesome.
Yeah, it's really awesome. And that's like one of the, in fact, those are the two flagship programs of Shanghai University of Sport, is that they have a Wushu PhD program and they got a ping pong program.
That's amazing. Considering how many times I've been asked, what are you going to do with that dance degree? I have to wonder. I have to wonder what like a guy with a doctorate degree in ping pong must say when people have conversations with him. I mean, there really is only one thing you can do with that. I mean, play ping pong, I guess. But,
well, no. So in China, they would be with the PhD in ping pong. Yeah, you would have a really good job. You would.
That's true, because ping pong is one of the major sports here.
Yeah, it's one of the major sports.
Like ping pong, badminton, basketball.
Yep, certain things that they're able to actually do well at the Olympics. And ping pong, apparently they just dominate the world. I don't know a lot about ping pong, but there was one European kid that was in the ping pong program. And he was telling me, he's like, I've played my whole life, and I just can't believe what the Chinese players can do. I just couldn't believe how much higher level they were.
No, it's nuts how much like casual ping pong players are able to do here.
Yeah.
Let alone like the pros, man. They're really well trained guys.
Yep. Yeah. So we had to answer your question, because I went off track because I'm old now, but they had the Chinese wrestling, which is men and women.
Yeah.
On the same team training together. Freestyle wrestling, which is women only, and Greco-Roman, which is men only.
Really? So freestyle is only the women?
A lot of the sports schools in China have freestyle as girls only, and the reason why I believe is because of sort of the government, communist government's idea about inclusion and everybody gets a fair chance. Well, because Greco is only male, so I guess they do females, for the freestyle, so that it evens out.
Oh wow! So it's kind of like the Title IX thing over in the U.S.
It's Title IX.
If you're not familiar with that, it was an attempt to have a equality among gender in sports in the U.S., and so a lot of sports programs ended up getting cut.
Yep. Well, as soon as you cut the wrestling program, you increase the percentage of women in sports. Yeah. Which is not the spirit. The spirit of Title IX was you should create other teams that your girls can participate in, and instead they just cut wrestling.
Yeah, it was a well-intentioned idea, but ultimately, they just ended up cutting a bunch of programs. Man, I remember I went to Brigham Young University, which at the time had one of the top wrestling programs in the U.S. And man, when Title IX came in, it was gone. Men's wrestling wrestling was gone.
Right? Brigham Young does because when you said that, I'm unfamiliar with Brigham Young's wrestling program.
Yeah, Mark Schultz, he was the coach back then.
Was he really?
Yes, Mark Schultz, who fought in the UFC
before he died. Oh, no.
I think he's still alive. It's his brother.
His brother was
the
shot.
one that got shot. Yeah, they made that movie Foxcatcher about him. But yeah, really, really interesting story on that guy. But yeah, he was an incredible coach. They had one of the top teams in the U.S., and Title IX came in, and boom, gone.
Wow, I didn't realize that. Oh.
What else? The men's volleyball team, they were #1 ranked in the U.S., I think, back in 1996, gone.
But you know what, though? I mean, the flip side is that, what the university should have done was apportioned more money for women's sports, which is what the intent was.
Exactly.
Because by cutting wrestling, you didn't create any new opportunities for women, right?
Yeah.
You just increase the percentage on paper. But yeah, that's interesting. So I work as a director. So normally I work as director of university. So it's like an academic director. Right now I'm working for a chain of American high schools in China, and when I go home, my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, is also a director. We have the same position, but he's at St. John's University. And I think it's really interesting when I talk to him about and he doesn't particularly like sports, but I really enjoy talking to him about this and seeing how we have very different ideas. And so for me, I said that, a lot of people want to cut football. And because football, and the other thing about football is that it's one of the only other sports that's all male. You have wrestling and you have football, the only ones that are all male. And they want to cut it, but then you can't because football and basketball together generate enough money that it supports all the other sports teams.
Yeah, that's where money comes from at universities, man. Football teams and basketball teams.
Yeah, believe it or not, girls, curling doesn't, doesn't pay for itself.
Going back to the women's freestyle wrestling in China, that makes me wonder though. In China, and this is something I really don't know, does freestyle wrestling have like a stigma as like a women's sport here, like a girly thing? I'm just kind of curious because like in MMA circles, at least in the U.S., people generally think like, oh, freestyle wrestlers are generally the better athletes, as opposed to Greco-Roman wrestlers. Like if you talk to Chael Sonnen, who came from a Greco-Roman background, he'll very bluntly say, yeah, the freestyle guys are better athletes, but. And a very important but, the Greco-Roman guys generally have more success transitioning to MMA for some reason.
I believe that. I absolutely believe. So that's the other thing about my background. Okay, so I came from I was a boxer. I boxed in the military. Then when I came to Asia, I started doing the TV show Martial Arts Odyssey, and I went all over and I trained everywhere. And then when I started fighting MMA. When I first got into MMA, everybody was doing single leg and double leg takedowns, and those freestyle wrestlers were having a lot of success. But I started really studying the video and studying the tapes, and I went, you know what? I've noticed that the Greco-Roman guys actually have a lot better success. And I patterned my own, and because I was older, it's a lot harder for me to shoot. I can't always change level and shoot very well.
It's a high risk, high reward.
It's a high risk, high reward. Whereas the Greco, and also coming from a boxing background, well, we have a clinch anyway.
Yeah.
I'm used to clinching my whole life, and I'm pretty strong anyway. And as you're getting older, you can still work on your strength. And so I started going more in the direction of Greco. Right now, one of my teammates from the university, he lives in the town where I live in Shandong. And so I've been training Greco now for like 6 months, almost exclusively only Greco, and doing mostly strength work. But yeah, definitely for MMA, I think Greco is a lot better because you've already got the clinch. It's upper body. People are looking for the shoot, and everybody in the world, every jiu-jitsu school, every MMA school, they teach people how to sprawl. Whether they're good at it or not, everybody knows how to sprawl. But sprawl only defends against single and double leg takedowns. It doesn't help you on the upper body takedowns.
Yeah, and that. Fascinating thing about the clinch, if you think about it, it's one of the most natural things in the world. Anytime you are close enough to touch somebody with a strike, it can turn into a clinching situation almost immediately. There was an Italian swordsman hundreds of years ago who wrote this book on sword fighting where he said something along
Indigo
the lines
Montoya.
I'm not sure if it was that guy. But he said, in single rapier combat, the better wrestler almost always kills his opponent.
Oh, interesting.
And if neither man knows how to wrestle, the stronger man almost always kills his opponent. And when I first read that, I was like, what? Wait, back up. They have swords. Why would they wrestle? And I started thinking about that more logically. Like, wait, as soon as you cross the blades, that can turn into a grappling situation immediately. I mean, that's where jiu-jitsu came from, samurai sword fighting. And why do they need to know how to clinch and throw and do all this grappling if swords are involved? Well, again, because as soon as the blades cross, it becomes a grappling situation. And if you watch almost any fight, like boxing, for example, how often does a clinch happen in boxing? All the time.
Yep.
The referee's always coming in, break it up, break it up. Why? Because as soon as you're close enough to hit each other with a tight hook or something like that, it becomes a grappling situation.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, so that was my feeling. And then the more I got into it, the more I just discovered that Greco was the way to go. And also Greco-Roman wrestlers are just so much stronger than, I mean, all wrestlers, he's got monkey strength, he's got gorilla strength, but Greco-Roman wrestlers, I mean, it's just insane.
You have to be.
It's just unbelievable. Because every throw is a lift. Every throw is a lift. It's a crush followed by a lift. Which is there's no gravity throws, there's no lateral drops and all these other things. It's just crush, lift, slap.
Oh man, you want a good strength training program? Just get a grappling dummy to do a bunch of suplexes on that thing.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic workout.
Yep. And the thing is that nowadays, so we were talking about this before we started recording, which was, of course, the 13th podcast.
Yes, the 13th podcast. Not this one, which is number 14. Totally not 13.
This is obviously 14. But when we first started fighting in Asia, there weren't many people who knew jiu-jitsu. Even now, I mean, I would say probably jiu-jitsu and wrestling are the two absolute weakest points across Asia because there's not that many Asian black belts. Even now, there's not that many Asian people that have black belts.
In fact, it was just a couple of years ago, like the first Chinese guy earned a black belt. Was it Stanley Tam, I believe? And
the first Chinese woman, I think, just recently, like a couple of weeks ago. If I'm not mistaken, yeah, and then there's countries that don't even have wrestling teams. Like Malaysia doesn't even have a wrestling team. Indonesia has a wrestling team, but they have like maybe two major sport facilities in the whole country where they train all the wrestlers. So anyway, so one of the things I came up with for MMA, right? Because I'm hopefully going to be fighting again real soon, but what I've been working on a lot is stand-up grappling and not throwing. Just standing up and controlling the opponent, grinding on him, just really grinding on somebody the way you do in wrestling, but without letting him go to the ground and hitting him. It's a combination like dirty boxing, bear hug, because I'm really into catch wrestling and I read a lot about it. Those guys used to win; they would win matches on a bear hug.
Yeah,
and that's my goal. Like every day, working on my grip strength to the point that I could win a match on a bear hug. If I could win a match on a bear hug.
Yeah, I read this. I read this book on sumo wrestling, the art of the sumo tori, way back when, and I read this account about this sumo wrestler named Raiden. Spelled like Raiden, the Mortal Kombat character. I think that's where they may have got the name. And the guy was apparently famous for lifting people off the ground with like a bear hug position and squishing them until their hip bones broke.
Yep.
And apparently he won a bunch of matches lifting these giant wrestlers off the ground and just crushing their hip bones. Not even like squeezing the breath out of them, but like actually breaking one of the strongest skeletal structures on the human body.
I think, though, when you weigh 350 pounds, it changes things.
Yeah, when you have that type of strength and weight and girth to move around, it makes a difference.
But if you read, so in my book... So the Wrestlers Dissertation, right? So I wrote my dissertation, then I translated it back into English, and I published it as a book in the States. But in that book, there's a chapter about catch wrestling, and I'm just fascinated. I was born in the wrong era, man. Those guys traveling around in carnival shows, fighting all comers every night, 10, 12 matches a night, every night for years.
Oh man, catch wrestling is cool, man. I love it. You ever read Jake Shannon's book, Say Uncle?
Yeah.
Collection of interviews with the old-timey catch wrestlers, man. That's a great read.
I read so many of those in in my dissertation. You look in the reference sections like Say Uncle, Physical Chess, Blue Blood on the Mat, The Barnums of Balance. I don't know. There's so many of these books.
Yeah, what's crazy about catch wrestling is how underappreciated it is today. But I have this theory. You know how UFC, the original UFC that the Gracies put on was basically the best infomercial ever for Gracie Jiu-Jitsu?
Right.
Imagine for a minute if some catch wrestlers got together before they had that UFC idea and decided to put on like a catch wrestling invitational UFC style event and had like the best catch wrestler go out there and just twist everybody into knots, what would be the state of mixed martial arts today?
I don't think, unfortunately, I love catch wrestling. I would love to see it, have a takeoff. And when I'm in New York, I'm good friends with Eddie Goldman, No Holds Barred, and I'm on his show pretty frequently. And we train at Sambo Steve's place in New York City. And we all love catch wrestling, and we talk about it all the time. There's no way. There's just no way. Jiu-jitsu is the perfect. Unfortunately, and people who know me know that I sort of hate jiu-jitsu, but I have to admit how good it is. Like, I have to admit how good it is. Doesn't mean that I have to like it. It is good. And but jiu-jitsu is the perfect thing because anybody can do it. Women can do it. Children can do it. Small people that are not athletic. There are people that are phenomenal jiu-jitsu players who are not even athletes, let alone they're not fighters or they're not martial artists. They're not even athletes, and they're good at jiu-jitsu. And that's not true of catch wrestling. You have to have the physical attributes to do catch. It is still wrestling. And also there's no guard, which makes a huge difference. There is a guard, but your shoulder blades are not allowed to touch the ground.
True.
Most people cannot hold a guard where their shoulder blades don't touch the ground for 20 minutes.
Yeah, it takes effort, man. And so often at my gym we'll do grappling under catch wrestling rules, and it's shocking to a lot of people, like, but I have to keep moving. Like, it's shocking when they end up in the guard and they come from a jiu-jitsu background and they feel like, okay, I'm safe here, I'm fine here, and then it's like, it's over, you lose. And they're like, well, but it's neutral. Like, no, it's not a neutral position.
Well, I hate that. They when they were going to put on He Who Shall Not Be Named was involved in putting on a allegedly catch wrestling tournament in Shanghai.
Yeah.
And then when I saw the chatter on the internet, somebody asked, oh, but is this one of those BS catch wrestling tournaments where I could be considered pinned if I'm in my guard? And I'm thinking, first of all, that's not BS. That's the rule of catch wrestling. You can't be on your back. And so he immediately said, oh, no, we're going to allow the guard. I'm like, so this is not a catch wrestling tournament. This is a jiu-jitsu tournament. That's all it is. It's no-gi jiu-jitsu. Man. And probably a catch wrestler's still going to win it.
Yeah, and unfortunately, jiu-jitsu does a lot of great things, and I love it, and I practice it on a daily basis. But at the same time, I think it gives people a lot of false confidence for what the guard actually is in a real fight. Because it's often told that the guard is a neutral position. And I'm going to say straight up, no, it's not. In MMA, absolutely not. And that's demonstrable with the fact that you've got strikes from the top with gravity on your side. But even in grappling, even in the sport of jiu-jitsu, grappling is demonstrably not the guard is not a neutral position. If you look at statistics for IBJJF tournaments, the most watered-down version of jiu-jitsu competition. Fight me on that in the comments if you want. If you look at these statistics, the competitor who scores the first takedown wins the match over 90% of the time. You can look this up. The competitor who scores the first guard pass almost 100% of the time wins the match.
Right.
Basically, the guy who stays on top most of the time wins the match. And you might say, well, what about all those people who pull guard and win? And the thing is, statistically, if you watch an IBJJF tournament, like 80% of people are pulling guard. And when everybody's doing something, you're going to see some success coming from that.
One of the things about, I totally agree with you. Like, people ask me all the time, how does wrestling play into MMA, or why is it important? I said, well, because you get the takedown and you get top position. And then wrestlers just have really good balance, so they tend to be able to hold top position. Especially now, like one of my friends, Kirk, he was a provincial champion in Canada. He's a very good wrestler. He's only a few years younger than me. He came over to the university. He wrestled with my teammates. None of them could take him down. He's like in his late 40s, and he's like wrestling these guys that are in their 20s that are in great shape, and he's beating them all. But anyway, he entered the jiu-jitsu tournament here. He got something like 18 takedowns or something, and then he got armbarred because he absolutely didn't know the first thing about jiu-jitsu. But as a rule, that doesn't happen anymore in MMA. As a rule, right? It used to happen, right? The wrestler came in, take the guy down, and next thing you know, he's been submitted.
Yeah.
But that doesn't happen anymore because everybody knows enough. You know enough jiu-jitsu that, you know.
That's the thing. You don't have to be a great jiu-jitsu guy to excel at mixed martial arts, even be a world champion. You got to know enough, just like you said.
And there's been a lot of question. This came up. Chris Kennedy from also a Mormon friend of mine who's a fighter out of Utah, and he trains in Cambodia with me as well. And Chris was asking the other day on the internet. He goes, "How much?" Because he's a BJJ, I believe, purple belt, but it's one of these purple belts where if he was with a different teacher, it would probably be a black belt. But he's just very respectful to his teacher, and so. But yeah,
the skill disparity there is in purple belts throughout the world.
Yeah, and he's one of these, like, he's very high ranked purple belt, and he said on the internet the other day, he goes, I want to learn wrestling and boxing to improve my MMA game, and he goes, but how much time should I spend on these things? And because the question comes up, like, when you start trying to learn another art, do you dilute your own art? And what I told him was, I said, look, wrestling and BJJ, you almost can't learn both because the philosophy is so different. And the thing that it's sort of like, this is a really weird, it's going to sound like a weird comparison, but karate and MMA. Okay. We used to believe karate was useless, and then Lyoto Machida, then we said, okay, but he's a one-off. But suddenly there's guys like Wonder Boy Thompson. There's guys coming in using karate, and they're winning. And I'm going to tell you, I know what's going to happen. Other guys are going to go, I'm going to go learn some karate now. It's like, that's not why they're winning. They're not winning because they know some karate. They're winning because they dedicated their whole life to karate. And when you're at that level, it's helpful. And I believe that having a little karate is probably useless to you.
And also they know how to grapple, and they know what jiu-jitsu is, and they know how to box and that sort of stuff.
But the big thing is about that awkward stance. That's the main thing I'm looking at. It's like they got this weird, awkward stance. It's very difficult to hit them, very difficult to take them down. But I think you only get that from doing it for a lifetime. I think if you added karate to your game, you wouldn't suddenly develop this stance. That's what I'm saying.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I feel that way about adding wrestling. Like Chris is a really gifted BJJ player, and he's had some success in Muay Thai fights and things like that. I think, go learn some wrestling, but don't put a lot of hopes on it because it's different. First of all, if we wrestle right now and I wind up in your guard, which I probably will, I'll be in your guard. The BJJ thing, I think, is that you posture up, and the wrestling thing though is that you drive in. I put all my weight forward, and you know how many jiu-jitsu teachers tell me don't ever do that. And I'm like,
really?
But that's exactly. As a wrestler, I would instantly put all my weight, all my elbows on, the chest or on the face of the opponent and just lean all the way forward, posture up. There
are so many great options from that in mixed martial arts especially. I mean, look at George St. Pierre, for example. How many... I saw this, he did this seminar, and I got this old VHS tape of this seminar he did back in the day. When
What's a VHS tape?
Anyway, so... He's teaching the double leg takedown. He teaches this really technical double leg takedown, and he's like, and once they are on the ground, you jump into their guard. And I was like, wait,
jump into their guard?
Why would you do that? Why jump into his guard? Are you kidding me? What if he knows jiu-jitsu? And then he just demonstrates just smashing them in the guard, and you watch his fights. That's exactly what he did. He took people down, jumped into their guard, controlled them, pinned their hips, pinned their shoulders in the guard, and beat them up there. And he won world titles on that. And that's one of the big differences between MMA and jiu-jitsu is you don't actually have to pass the guard. You can use that to pin them with pressure.
Right. Yeah, so like I prefer to work from half guard, but without a doubt I can work from inside of the guard as well. Yeah, and I really don't know how to pass, and it's really funny, and I've had some jiu-jitsu lessons, but I really don't know how to pass the guard. It just kind of happens naturally eventually, so you just fight your fight, and pressure your fight from inside the guard, and eventually the pass just kind of reveals itself.
Yeah, that's one way to do it. That's kind of how I started to learn guard passing, because back in the day I got these very technical lessons like put your elbow here, put your knee here, posture up here, and it was never working out. And so I just started thinking I'm going to fight like an alligator snapping turtle. They just kind of sit there with their tongue out and wait and see what happens. Wait for the fish to come and nibble. And so at first, just waiting for my opponent to react. It taught me so much about guard passing. Now I can break it down in a bunch of technical ways. But It's a great way to start that out.
I was in we were talking about why jiu-jitsu, can be economically viable, but catch wrestling can't. So when I trained in Bali pretty frequently, I've trained with Nico. They're about synergy Bali MMA jiu-jitsu. And it's really just jiu-jitsu, but Nico's funny, man. He's really he reads books about all the other, wrestling and catch wrestling, and he trained in the States for a long time, so he's got a different mindset, for his jiu-jitsu. But anyway, he said to me, he goes, I love catch wrestling, he goes, but every time I watch the videos on the internet, he goes, everybody who teaches catch wrestling is like these humongous muscle-bound guys, and he's like, and every technique starts like this: first, rip their arm, and then twist it this way. Okay, now apply the technique.
So true. Like literally everybody except for Jake Shannon.
Yeah,
He's like
Jake
the
Shannon's the
one
only
skinny
one.
dude teaching catch wrestling out there.
All these other guys, I don't know all their. Well, Tony Caccione,
Like Brandon Ruiz. Man,
yeah,
that dude's a monster.
There's monsters. These are guys that I think if they had no training, they could beat up most people.
Yeah. And then with training, like, man, Brandon Ruiz, you look at that guy, he's like 265 pounds, lean, and like 300 if he puts on some weight or something like that. And guy's also a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's a catch wrestling world champion at one point. I think he was a Pan American silver medalist in freestyle wrestling as well. Did Greco-Roman, just this amazing grappling pedigree. But you look at the guy and you realize even without any of that, he could still just grab your head and squish it.
Yeah. I watched. It was really funny. I bought UFC Fight Pass, and I have to say it's like the best investment. That was $10, and I watch it all the time. Whereas Bitcoin was 10,000, and now it's not.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so it's much better investment than Bitcoin. You heard it here. UFC Fight Pass, better investment than Bitcoin.
There you go.
No, seriously, it's like $10, and I watch it all the time. So I'm watching all the fights in sequence, right? Because I got some sort of ADD. So like, and if anybody interrupts me, I have to start over again. But I
It's
forgot.
okay. It's educational.
I can't remember the name of the fighter though. There's this one up and coming. He might be one of the ones from Tennessee. Suddenly, there's a few really good guys out of Tennessee.
Yeah.
And it might be one of them. But anyway, it's this guy. Can't remember his name. Anyway, he's probably like 170 pounds, right? But he's like, just everybody says he's like preposterously stronger than everybody else in the division for some reason. No one really knows why. And they measured his hands, and his hands are actually bigger than Brock Lesnar's hands, even though he's like 170 pounds. And there was this one, and I was thinking of Nico because there was this one, he was on his back. The guy is on top of him, and he grabs the guy's hand. And they go, oh, he's going for a Kimura, but there's no way you can get it from this position. He just rips it. Like he had literally zero position, no body weight. It was just like muscles.
Oh man, the Kimura can definitely turn into a strength-based submission.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. Like Marcelo Garcia, he wrote, I don't even teach the Kimura anymore because it requires too much strength, and Marcelo is all about leverage and stuff that'll work against anybody because he's an open weight competitor, and he's fought guys like Rico Rodriguez, for example. He's like twice his size.
Huge, yeah.
And a Kimura is not going to work. Against a guy that with that type
Can
of
you
size
choke
disparity.
Rico Rodriguez?
He did. He
Did
finished
he?
the fight with a rear naked choke. So
That's
if you get Marcelo Garcia's book, Advanced Jiu-Jitsu, which is a phenomenal book, I'd highly recommend it to any grappler. I was initially disappointed when I bought it because it's like 300 pages, and I flipped through it like, all right, where are all the cool fancy techniques? Because I just read Mastering the X-Guard with also by Marcelo Garcia, which it's a fairly complex move, right? But here's what Advanced Jiu-Jitsu is: 300 pages about how to take the back and finish the rear naked choke.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Isn't that it? Well, right? There's statistics. There's people that keep statistics on this, right? And something like 80% of the submissions are rear naked chokes, I believe, and guillotines, and maybe armbar. I don't know. Do arm bars even happen anymore? I'm not even sure if that.
Yeah, I read the most recent statistics on that. Rear naked choke is by far the #1 submission in all of mixed martial arts and all sport grappling, all jiu-jitsu, all submission grappling altogether. In the UFC, I think the statistic is somewhere along the lines of 80% of all submissions completed are the rear naked choke. And then after that, it's kind of a toss-up between the guillotine and then the triangle choke. And then after that, arm locks are are what is it? It's like 2% of submissions.
Yeah.
And then everything after that is like
what
fractions
about, like,
of a percent.
Omoplata?
Oh man, the omoplata. There's a crazy thing about the omoplata. A lot of when was it? When Joe Rogan freaked out when the very first omoplata shoulder lock finish was completed in the UFC a couple of years ago, and everybody was like, "What? We thought that was only a positional transition," and it's a great positional transition from bottom to top for MMA, but nobody was finishing the shoulder lock. And this guy actually did it, and everybody was screaming, "It's the first omoplata in UFC history!" Except there was actually an omoplata, I think, way back when in like UFC 16, 17, something like that.
Nobody knew what it was, maybe.
When Frank Mir fought Tank Abbott, except he didn't finish the shoulder lock. He used it to set up a toehold. Yeah, you do the omoplata, you reach for the leg behind, and you get the toehold.
Nice.
And everybody forgot about that, just swept it under the rug until 20 years later.
Oh, man, the other Dagestan, well, there's a few Dagestan guys now, and they're all doing really well. But this other one, I forgot his, Oleg Popov, something, it's like a really long name that ends in Popov.
Yeah, man.
But also from Dagestan. But I saw him do a crazy finish the other day. He jumped on the guy's back, was going for the rear naked choke. The guy stood up. He starts to slide off, and you're thinking he's sliding off. He reaches underneath and catches the ankle.
Oh.
And turned it into a knee lock.
Man, leg locks are everywhere, man.
And it was insane. But it was insane because, you think, oh, rookie mistake. He's too high on the rear naked choke. He's going to fall on the floor and get reversed. But actually, that was his plan. Like, those guys are.
And once you realize there are submission options below the belt, it gets really, really interesting.
Yeah.
I had this student, this girl who came into me for private training, and she trained with me every morning for about 2 years. And one day I just said, I'm going to show this girl leg locks, because she just kind of took to grappling like a fish to water. And I showed her a couple of things, and then we were grappling at one point, and she caught me in the Karl Gotch Toehold. I didn't teach her that. I did not teach her that. I'm like, where did you learn that from? She said, "What do you mean, where did I learn that from? Your foot was right there. The legs are always right there. Why don't people do this all the time? It's not even that hard. I mean, why have I never seen this move in the UFC?" 'Cause she independently figured it out.
Yeah.
Just understanding, position and then attack, and that works on the legs the same way as it works on the upper body.
Yeah, when I'm in Malaysia, I teach MMA, and a lot of what I try and teach is concepts, And so, like, one of the concepts, like for the Karl Gotch Toehold, was that if you put anything blocking the back of the knee, whether it's your shin or your forearm, blocking the back of the knee, and then you pull up on the toe, that's a submission.
Yeah.
So then we were doing like side ride. Okay, you're in side ride. Oh, well, instead of putting your knee next to your opponent's knee, put it on his knee, the back of his knee, and then you can reach back and just grab the toe, and it becomes a submission.
Oh man, the side ride is a heavily underutilized, super useful position in mixed martial arts that very few people are capitalizing on.
Well, you know why though? It's because so I'm actually working on an article right now about techniques that we thought didn't work, and they do.
Yeah.
And so side ride, what happened with side ride, I think, was initially some people did side ride, they had success with it, but there's just a very basic jiu-jitsu reversal for the side ride, right, where you just catch the guy's arm and you just roll, and
people always try to Granby out of it.
Yeah, and so I think they saw that happen and they went, oh, side ride is useless. And then next thing you know, there's high level wrestlers in there doing side ride, and you could try and roll him all day. He's not going because he's either putting his knee between your legs, or he's kneeling on your knee, or I mean, there's a million ways you can do it that you can't get rolled. But I think that's what happened. I think that roll came into play, and people went, oh, okay, that's not a good technique.
Yeah. Oh man, it's kind of funny how we have this tendency to see patterns in a fight, like we saw Royce Gracie win UFC with jiu-jitsu, and so we're like, okay, jiu-jitsu works and nothing else does, and we were stuck in that dogma for so many years, almost 20 years. In fact, so many people still believe that jiu-jitsu is the only thing that works in a cage fight. But it takes an outlier, somebody to do something something different, like when Edson Barbosa did that first spinning heel kick.
Yeah,
heel
yeah,
kick in the
yeah,
UFC
yeah.
and knocked that dude out, and people were suddenly like, "Wait, that stuff works."
And
in a
now,
fight?"
and now it's every time.
Everybody's
now it's
doing it now.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Jumping kicks. Yeah, this is all in this article I'm working on. Jumping kicks, Superman punches, flying knees, stuff that people, and karate. Like I have a
but
whole
we
thing.
need to see it happen
Yeah.
first before most of us are willing to even try.
But interestingly, what's really interesting, wrestling. There was I don't remember the year. Maybe it was like '96 or something. That basically what happened was there was an Olympic trials, and all the guys who didn't make the Olympics basically all flooded into the UFC at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's when the thing happened that people went, oh, wrestling's a really dominant martial art. And that's when, Mark Coleman and all those guys came in. And they all knew each other, and they all wrestled at Syracuse and like the different places. But anyway, the point of the story that I want to make, though, in early UFC, there were two other wrestlers. There was Dan Severn,
Yeah.
and there was the Canadian. Like he was an Olympian. He was probably the first Olympian to ever be in the UFC. The Canadian, is it Dave Beneteau? Was that his name?
Yeah.
But I believe that he was an Olympian, and I don't remember him dominating. I don't remember him winning. And somehow I don't know, how did two wrestlers go in, and nobody noticed. And then suddenly when that wave came in, and suddenly, oh my God, wrestling's a dominant martial art.
Well, at the same time, that second wave of wrestlers had a chance to study.
True.
And, see the film and say, okay, this is what it is. Because, when UFC 1 came out, we were expecting to see Bloodsport live, Jean-Claude Van Damme.
We thought
movie or
karate
something.
might win.
Yeah.
Or taekwondo or something might win.
And so nobody had any idea. Everybody went into that just expecting a death fight.
True.
I'm sure those fighters, their nerves were probably up through the roof, and they were probably broken mentally before they even stepped in the cage. Except for like
Ken
horses.
Shamrock actually said that.
Yeah.
He said that they were in the back watching
Really?
it on the the TV screen, and when the Dutch guy knocks the guy's tooth out, and the tooth goes flying, and he said that when they saw the tooth come out, he said like in the ready room they all just like went silent. They're like, oh my God, what are we doing here?
Oh wow. Yeah. Meanwhile, Royce coming from that Ballet Tudo tradition where it's like, just grapple, whatever, no big deal. These guys don't know jiu-jitsu. They were going in there with a whole different understanding of the sport.
Yes. But and that was interesting too, was that Ken Shamrock actually said that had he seen any tape on Royce first, he would have won. But he said that what happened was he saw the uniform and he instantly wrote him off, because there were guys who showed up in those early ones that were wearing like kung fu uniforms. So he just wrote him off. Oh, he's one of those traditional martial arts guys, and he just wrote him off, didn't even think about it. And he said had he known for even a second, like he would have beat him. And in their second fight, under today's rules, Ken Shamrock would have won.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Man, he dominated him
second
for 30 minutes. Royce was a bloody mess at the end of that.
Yeah.
But it was a draw.
But it was a draw under the old rules. Yeah, that's where Mark Coleman and Kerr and all those guys kind of complained too, though, that when the rules changed in the late 90s, that knocked a lot of them out. And it really interesting is that those guys were dominant. That first wave of wrestlers, they were dominant for different reasons. Like, you look at the guys today, I mean, there's so much, just in terms of technical skill, and just so much better. And they're so much more dominant. Like look at a Daniel Cormier. I mean, other than Mark Kerr in his first 10 fights was probably that dominant, right? Where you just go in, like you're almost not even getting hit and just ragdolling guys.
Yeah.
But Mark Kerr was also fighting a lot of people that didn't know anything. Daniel Cormier is going there. He started with ranked contenders. I mean, the minute he came in the UFC, they put him with ranked contenders. He's throwing Roy Big Country Nelson up in the air.
Oh, yeah.
Same thing
easy
to
task.
Josh Barnett. I mean, who has ever mauled Josh Barnett in the history of Josh Barnett?
That's a good question.
That
is a good question, man. That's a guy who just doesn't get mauled on principle.
No. I mean, you're talking about a level of domination that's just unprecedented. Like I said, Kerr. You watch Kerr's early fights. Yeah, he dominated guys like that, but there were also guys that just didn't know, and there were no weight divisions.
Yeah.
So some of them were a lot smaller than he was, and they didn't know anything.
But here we're seeing a guy who wrestles dominating other people who are also wrestlers. And
and Josh Barnett was the winner of Matamoros, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, he's arguably, he's in my book. I actually wrote about him. It was really hard to, because the whole book's not about MMA, right? And it's not all about catch wrestling, but those are like my two favorite things. But I had to really be selective who I wrote about. But I did write about Josh Barnett in my book because you know, he's one of the only guys that was king of, I believe he was king of Pancrase, won the Matamoros, UFC champion at some point, something else champion, I believe, maybe one of the other organizations. I don't remember now all the titles, but
he was also awarded a honorary jiu-jitsu black belt after beating a bunch of jiu-jitsu black belts in the gi without ever having worn a gi before, which is crazy impressive if you've never tried that.
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, he may have been king of Pancrase also. I think he was. And he's one of the few king of Pancrase that's still around. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's your book called for those out there who would like to look this up, read it?
The Wrestlers Dissertation. And it's the first book in history. You know, when you do a PhD dissertation, you have to do something that's never been done before. So it's a comparison of the development of Chinese wrestling and Western wrestling. And basically, I laid out a timeline for the development of Western wrestling. So starting with like pre-Olympic wrestling in the ancient Greece, pancration, the gladiatorial games in Rome, and then interestingly, as Western wrestling kind of dies, it actually sports in general in Europe kind of die from the time that the Roman Emperor converted to Christianity, because the Olympics was actually a religious festival, you know, to honor Zeus, you know. So when the Roman Emperor became Christian, then they eventually banned the Olympics, and then that was it for wrestling. And wrestling comes back in the mid-19th century in France.
Yeah, that's where Greco-Roman wrestling came from, in France.
Yeah, and people think that it has something to do with Greece and Rome. It doesn't actually. It was invented in France. And almost simultaneously, or within a few years, you have the catch wrestling coming out of Lancashire?
Yeah, Lancashire, England.
In England. And then what's fascinating for me, right, and I probably have a very biased opinion because I'm American, but what's very fascinating for me is this thing that gets invented in France and this other thing that gets invented in England. They go to America, and the Americans just take it to this level that no one imagined. I mean, the Americans won 100% of the Olympic wrestling medals in the first Olympics, the first modern Olympics.
I read about that.
Yeah, and America dominated wrestling until probably.
Now, one thing I read about the early modern Olympics about wrestling was that it was under catch as catch can rules, but they didn't call it catch wrestling; they called it amateur wrestling.
So so catch wrestling was So what happened was there wasn't really. So there was Greco-Roman was actually a professional sport.
Right.
And catch was a professional sport as well. And people would go, like, pay money to watch people do Greco-Roman and pay money to watch people do catch. So when they were doing the Olympics, they had to pick something. So they picked catch because they thought it was more exciting. So catch was actually in the Olympics, I believe, 3 or 4 times. And then the AAU in the United States, it's the athletic union that manages amateur sports in the United States, and then the National Collegiate Athletic Association, they decided that they were going to sanction wrestling as a collegiate sport, as a school sport, as an amateur sport, but they thought it was too dangerous because of the catch. So they decided they would take the submissions out, but they decided the Greco-Roman was too restrictive, like it's a little boring to watch, right? So people said, oh, we really like the catch wrestling, but it's too dangerous. They said, okay, so we'll do catch wrestling, but we'll take out the submissions, and that's how we get American folk-style wrestling.
Right.
That's what it is. It's basically just catch, but they've taken out the submissions.
So pin only, pin without
only.
The submission.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is interesting.
And then, so in my timeline, I said that WWE and UFC, or let's say MMA and professional wrestling, are the 2 modern evolutions, the highest evolutions of wrestling. This is where we are now.
Oh yeah, that's right. Because WWE, even though it's sports entertainment, still has the original catch wrestling rules, if you will, pin or submission.
Yeah, pro wrestling, what we call pro wrestling today, is based on catch wrestling. And if you look at early pro wrestling, in fact, through even early TV wrestling, even into the 70s, you see a lot of holds. You know, and whenever people said, you're learning, there was another thing I was working on. It was called Wrestling and Other Media, and it was like finding old episodes of TV shows like Father Knows Best, or like these old shows where there was like one episode where they were learning about wrestling, right? And all these things, whenever they go to learn wrestling, they learn holds.
Oh, that is fascinating. I learned the lateral drop sweep by watching an episode of Saved by the Bell. I kid you not. I kid you not. You ever watch that show?
I'm aware of it.
Okay, so there's this episode. Two of the main protagonists get in a fight. They get mad at each other over some girl or whatever. And what's his name? The guy Mario Lopez plays a wrestler on the show. I guess he was a wrestler in real life. And he throws the other guy with a lateral drop sweep. And I was looking at that like, that looks like a real move. That looks legit. I want to figure that out. And I watched this clip over and over again trying to figure out how he did it. And it's a legit move. It's a great move. I love it to this day. And man, I learned that from a TV show.
Yeah.
Stupid TV show.
But a lot of those old TV shows, though, there was a lot of holds. That was the big thing, was holds, you know. And then as we got into the 70s, then there was a lot more acrobatics. They traced all the acrobatics back to a single wrestler, this French guy. They called him the Flying Frenchman. And he was a circus acrobat and gymnast, and so he became a pro wrestler. And I guess he wasn't big, you know.
It's like the whole Mexican lucha libre acrobatic tradition of jumping off the turnbuckles and all that. You can trace that back to this French guy.
Back to this one guy. Yeah, and basically like that was his thing. Sort of like Jake the Snake, you know. He had to come up with something that made him special, and so he did the acrobatics, and then that became really popular.
That's one reason I loved watching Univision back when I lived in the US. Besides the announcer, este sábado en Univision vamos a ver lucha libre. Yeah, that guy has a great voice.
Did you used to watch Sábado Gigante?
Sábado Gigante. Yeah, Mexican wrestling is amazing because they got these guys. They don't even look like they're in shape. They're like fat pot-bellied dudes, but they're doing like triple somersaults off the turnbuckles, and they're like, how is that physically possible? Man, so
two of my heroes are Blue Angel and Blue Demon and Angel. Love those guys. And I was in contact with Blue Angel's son, Blue Demon's son, about going to his gym in Mexico because I want to do an episode of Martial Arts Odyssey where I go to. I did pro wrestling, so I did a pro wrestling episode of my show, and there's a pro wrestling section in my book. But and I did one for Black Belt Magazine. So Black Belt Magazine, I got this column called Destinations, and it's, you know, I go all around the world doing different things. So one of the things I did was I went to New York and I went to pro wrestling school. But I want to do one in Mexico.
Oh, that would really rule, man. You need to do that. That would rule.
It's been hard, though. I don't have a contact. Hey, if anybody's watching this and you got a contact for me, please, I will go tomorrow, man.
Make it happen.
And Blue Demon, they these two wrestlers, Blue Demon and Angel, and they were so popular in Mexico, and they became comic book heroes, movie stars. Blue Demon versus Frankenstein, like.
Oh, that's awesome!
Awesome.
So, like, their actual wrestling characters went on to become like personas outside of wrestling.
Yeah, but I think that's normal in Mexico. I mean, these guys will go on talk shows and they're wearing the mask.
Oh yeah, that's right.
You know, like
a lot of Mexican wrestlers do that. They like never take the mask off in public.
Mask off. Yeah, and it's funny because they're wearing a suit. You know, like they're on a talk show, they're wearing a suit and tie, but then he's wearing the mask. I think that's one of the coolest things.
You've probably seen that Jack Black movie,
Nacho Libre.
Nacho Libre. I was shocked to learn that was actually loosely based on a true story. That there actually was a Catholic priest who became a pro wrestler in order to like help orphans and stuff. And
so this is really funny. So I'm managing this school up in Shandong, right? And so I get there and I find out that all these guys that washed out of the sports schools, they're all from the same town. They're from this town, like where I'm working. Like there's unemployed wrestlers and sanda fighters like roaming the streets of this town where I'm living. Right?
Oh wow! Don't pick a fight with the homeless in Shandong, man.
So I got a job for one of them. I hired him as a Taekwondo teacher for my school. Right, so he comes and he teaches Taekwondo to my students, and then I had to create jobs for like my wrestling teammate and his brother, his younger brother, and his older brother. So of course the school, I can't ask the school to pay for that, so I just pay them out of my pocket, right? So I paid these guys out of my pocket to come teach my students, and I was teasing with my family. I'm like, yeah, you know, I got to save these guys' job, and the only way I can think to earn money is I'm going to have to become a professional MMA fighter. My niece is like, isn't that the plot of that movie with Kevin James?
That is the plot of that movie with Kevin James. Here Comes the Bang.
Yeah, that is awesome.
That was a fascinating movie, man. What was the big move in that movie? The Kimura, like he's trying to defend the Kimura. And anyway, Kevin James, man.
He's awesome. Bas Rutten is awesome. They're both awesome. But I wish Bas Rutten would get more movie roles because he's hilarious.
Oh, he is, man. He is. I mean, he's well. I think he's really well respected by the YouTube martial arts community. Probably more than anywhere else in the world right now. Because if you talk to like anybody out there who's into MMA, self defense, whatever on YouTube, the first name that always comes up is Bas Rutten.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas, out there in TV movie land, people are like, "What? Who?"
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people. I mean, yeah, a lot of people wouldn't know. I mean, he hasn't fought. It's been like 20 years or whatever since.
Yeah, but he's still the essentially the king of new media when it comes to real applications in martial arts.
He may have been the first one that had like a YouTube channel, or he may have been the first one. I'm not sure, but I like him a lot. Did you see the movie? There was a movie called 15 Minutes, and Oleg Taktarov played the bad guy, and he was so good.
That sounds vaguely familiar.
It's with Robert De Niro.
That sounds vaguely familiar.
And they actually won an award. The movie won a stuntman's award for. There's a scene where Robert De Niro is tied to a chair, and they're going to execute him, and he fights like he's tied to the chair, and he gets up and he almost wins. Like he beats up the two bad guys, gets the gun away from them, and it's totally believable. And it's just the most amazing. But then he's got the gun, and of course, because his arm's tied to the chair, like he can't shoot accurately.
I'm gonna have
and
to
they
look
wind up
this
killing him.
That sounds awesome.
But Oleg Taktarov is excellent in that, and I don't know why he didn't get more movie roles.
Man, Oleg Taktarov, he did a boxing match with what's his name, Dolph Lundgren. Did you see that?
I didn't see it. I just know about it. Yeah.
I watched that one. I think you can watch it on YouTube. It was televised on television. I don't remember when, but I was watching this like, what? The Dolph Lundgren, the actor, is boxing for real against a guy who actually competed in the UFC. This is interesting. I won't say it wasn't like one of the great boxing matches of all time. Far from it, but it was really cool to see that.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. They tried to do that when, if I'm not mistaken, after Rocky 1 or Rocky 2, they tried to do a thing where he was going to do a tour and do like real boxing, and he got hurt. And then they were like, this is a terrible idea.
Oh, man. Speaking of actors boxing, did you hear about Michael B. Jordan and, blanking on the name, famous Roy Jones Jr.?
Daniel LaRusso?
Michael B. Jordan, the guy who's playing
the Creed, son of Creed.
Son of Creed in the new Creed 2
Bride
movie.
Of Creed.
He gave some interview where they asked him, like, if you could box anybody in history, who would it be? And he said it would be Roy Jones Jr.
Wow.
And he said a few other words which kind of triggered some people out there on the internet. Word got around to Roy Jones Jr. and he said, I'll fight you. If you're serious, I'll fight you. I'll fight you in 2 weeks. I'll be ready.
See, I got a theory on this.
Yeah.
Okay, I got a theory on this. I believe there should be a movie title.
Yeah.
See, he holds the movie title right now.
Oh, yeah.
He's
the
holding,
movie boxing title.
Yeah, the movie boxing. He's the heavyweight champion of movie land,
movies,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you should and then figure out who's the contender, right? Because not anybody's allowed to challenge, for the title.
Yeah.
And then pick somebody as a contender, and then you can challenge for the title.
Oh, man, that would add a whole extra level of meta to the movies that,
Well, do you know that you can bet on pro wrestling?
Really?
Yeah, people are shocked when I tell them that. And they're like, but it's fake.
It makes sense because you can bet on anything. Like cricket fights here in China, people bet on
First of all, you can bet on
fights.
anything. It makes sense for that reason. No, but the other reason is that it's just like those TV shows. Like, I don't know if you remember, there used to be a TV show called Dallas, and there was a season cliffhanger where the main bad guy got shot, but you didn't see who shot him.
Yeah.
And people were
Who shot
placing bets.
JR?
Who shot JR?
I remember that. My grandma watched that show.
Yeah, and so pro wrestling's the same thing. Because although it's scripted, nobody knows what the script is. And so people bet on who's going to be the champion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can actually bet on pro wrestling.
Interesting. I wonder. There's probably a big demand for leaked scripts then, man.
Which in a weird way, Okay, and this is an odd segue, which in a weird way speaks in favor of allowing performance-enhancing drugs in sports, because if somebody said, well, I can't bet on pro wrestling because it's rigged, and then I would say, but no, that's the exact reason you can, because we all know it's rigged, so it's okay for you. We're all even. It's rigged. It's rigged.
Well, there you go. So how does that... Let's go back to this performance-enhancing
So if they're
drugs
all
thing.
doing it, it's even.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. Just for religious reasons, I got to be against performance-enhancing drugs. But no, but it has crossed. I have heard that argument. They're like, well, if everybody's doing it, then is it really an advantage? But then my argument is, well, if everybody's doing it and it's not an advantage and it's destroying your health, then don't do it.
Yeah. Sound logic in my book. A lot of people argue that there should be a natural division and then a take anything you want division in mixed martial arts.
Like there is in bodybuilding.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. The natty bodybuilders versus the science experiments.
But it's such a joke. When I was young, I tried bodybuilding for a year because I did martial arts my whole life, and then I decided for 1 year I was going to do bodybuilding, and I did one competition, trained a whole year, went to one competition, and decided this is the dumbest thing in the world. And one of the things that I hated was that when you're backstage, you're oiling up, and you look around the room and everybody else, and you go, okay, he's going to win. And there's nothing you can do about it. You're like,
you can't fight him or anything.
Yeah.
No arm wrestling.
Yeah. It's not like,
let's see who can lift more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're a fighter. Like you could look at a guy and go, geez, that's a big scary guy, but
I can catch him with the Toehold.
Exactly. Like,
Yeah.
okay, that guy's gonna win. And I'm like, what? Do I go home now?
Oh man, there was this bodybuilding competition that went viral on the internet where everybody looked, just jacked like superheroes or whatever. And then this one dude with like zero muscle striations looked like he just got up off the couch and he's like posing like totally serious. I don't know if it was a joke or if he was delusional or what was going on there, but
was it Ben Askren?
I'm gonna have to look it up. Dude, I don't think so.
Dude, I gotta say I love Ben Askren.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so excited he's going to be in the UFC now.
Oh, that's going to be interesting.
I got to say, I absolutely love this guy, and I love the fact that frequently when I watch Joe Rogan podcast or when I hear him doing commentary, they talk about Tiger Muay Thai and they talk about ONE FC.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it because, those of us that are over here in Asia and we're fighting and whatever, it's like, yeah, it's nice to know that the rest of the world knows about us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, ONE FC, that's an interesting show. I remember... So I fought in martial combat before Victor Quay reformed that into the ONE FC, and I remember talking to him. He had this meeting with the fighters, not even about the fight, but about his vision, his whole vision of the
Victor Quay.
Yeah, Victor Quay.
Yeah.
About how he wanted it to be this big thing, and how in Asia there's the most popular sports throughout Southeast Asia are cricket and golf and ping pong and badminton. And MMA was like trying to start an MMA show and make it popular was this huge undertaking, but he was willing to see it through, and he just has such immense passion for the sport and intelligence. He's got this like fighters always talk about fight IQ, but then there's what you might say is fight promoter IQ. He's got the fight promoter IQ to make it happen, and man, I'm so glad he did. Because otherwise, man,
it's huge. I mean, it's huge now, ONE FC. And, I did somebody commissioned me to write a report a few years ago about all of the professional organizations that have existed for MMA in Asia from the beginning.
Yeah.
And the majority of them only ran one. They ran one or two events, and then they were done. And the biggest ones, like until ONE FC, there was the Mortal Kombat, Martial Combat, Art of War, Dare,
Ultimate Wrestle.
That
was a real show. They had a show called Ultimate Wrestle up in Xi'an.
Oh yeah, but it didn't run a lot of.
No.
Yeah.
They did like 3 or 4, I think.
See, that's another interesting thing. There's a chapter in my book about this that MMA is born simultaneously. I mean, there's 3 countries that can basically take credit for MMA.
Yeah.
Would you guess?
The United States, since that's where UFC was, Brazil, because of Ballet, 3 countries. I'm gonna guess Russia because of all the. No,
No.
you're shaking your head. No, they just
Nope.
have good MMA fighters over there. Okay.
Yeah, they have good fighters, but they're not responsible for making the sport.
Japan.
Japan.
Okay,
Yeah,
there we go.
yeah.
I should have guessed
And
that first.
really interestingly, it's almost simultaneous that the Vale Tudo thing that was happening in Brazil,
Yeah.
and at the same time in Japan, what happened was apparently pro wrestling in Japan was even more real than it was in the States. It
Oh,
almost
yeah.
almost like it was in, say, the 50s in the States or the 40s, which was, it was scripted, but you had to actually know how to shoot and you had to know how to fight, because there were guys that would suddenly start fighting for real. And some of the matches actually were real.
Oh, yeah.
And some of them, the whole match was
And
real,
there
only the outcome was...
There were some phenomenal MMA fighters
Yeah.
who came from Japanese pro wrestling, like Kazushi Sakuraba, and even like Genki Sudo wrestled professional wrestling in Japan, like simultaneously as he was doing like K1 and MMA and everything else. That guy was just a freak, man.
And if you rattle off the names of all those Japanese professional, right? They all had one teacher. They had one teacher.
Yeah.
Whose name was Karl Gotch.
Okay.
Karl Gotch, he took the name, from Frank Gotch, was the greatest American wrestler, right? So Karl Gotch took that name. He trained at the Snake Pit in Wigan, trained with Billy Robinson. He was a pro wrestler, and at some point he was getting on in years, and they asked him to go to Japan and teach catch wrestling in Japan. And all those guys, Antonio Inoki, all those guys, they can all trace their lineage to one teacher, and it's Karl Gotch. And Frank Shamrock. Oh, yeah, and all the Americans. That's the other thing. I mentioned King of Pancrase. All the Americans that went to Japan to train, that's what they were trained in. So when Frank Shamrock, or rather Ken Shamrock, UFC 1, and he goes in and he wins by something, that's what it was. That was a Karl Gotch taught him submissions in Japan.
Yeah, I read his book. What was it called? Into the Lion's Den or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Published
Ken
right back
Shamrock's
then.
book,
Yeah, that's an interesting narrative about his wrestling in Japan and how different it was from wrestling in the U.S. and how sometimes it was worked fights, but a lot of the times it was straight shooting.
Yep. And a lot of it, the whole match was real, just the outcome. They would say, you just went out there and fought. Okay, but you have to lose, but otherwise it's a real fight. So they had to know how to fight. And so that happened all the way through Japanese pro wrestling. So then around the 90s, early 90s, all at the same time that Vale Tudo starts happening in Brazil. And then in Japan, they suddenly start making, there's like 3 or 4 new leagues that came. One of them was, I think it was called New World Japan Wrestling, NWJP or something like that. And they were like pro wrestling / MMA. It was sort of worked, but it sort of wasn't. There was rings. I don't know if you remember rings.
Yes.
The famous video online, the video title usually says MMA fighter beats up Ki master in Japan.
Yeah, one.
He's not an MMA fighter. He's a rings guy, and he's actually wearing the rings jacket. That was
really?
the jacket that they wore in rings.
Okay.
And
so this guy was a Japanese pro wrestler.
Basically, but this rings, the thing about rings was that it was at this point where pro wrestling was becoming MMA, but they didn't call it MMA. It was like, it's pro wrestling, but you're allowed to kick.
Yeah.
It's pro wrestling, but you're allowed to punch, or whatever. It wasn't quite MMA. And it was rings, and there was shudo, and shoot fighting, and pancrase. And all these things came right around the same time, and they all ran a number of shows. And then Mark Kerr gets invited down to Brazil to fight in the Vale Tudo competition. When I've checked, I don't know. Again, Brazil's a little bit outside of my area of research.
Right.
But from what I have found, there doesn't seem to have been that many of those events. The ones that are on YouTube are like the only one. There's like 3 of them. But anyway, it all happens around the same time. And then the same time, then the Gracies, 1992, I guess, that they put on UFC.
Yeah, isn't it interesting that just a couple of highly visible, highly watched videos can make people think, oh, that's all that happens in this country. For example, the whole kung fu craze in America, back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s even, had everybody believing that everyone in China is a kung fu expert. Everybody in Japan knows karate. Everyone
in Korea does know taekwondo, though.
Oh, that's true.
That is true. That is true. But they don't do martial arts. They just do taekwondo.
Oh, man.
But yeah, no, it's true. Every martial artist I've been friends with over here told me they came to China hoping to learn martial art, and then they got here and they realized that martial art is much more common in the United States than it is here. Yeah.
Oh, so much more. And I made a video a while back it's really popular on my YouTube channel. I didn't think it would be. It's titled something like "Kung Fu in China Isn't What You Think It Is," which is really just about my experience coming over here, thinking, yeah, I'll learn some Kung Fu. I'll
should have
learn
had
some
a longer
Sanda, something
title.
like that. Probably, and I talk a little bit about my understanding, my perspective of how the Cultural Revolution changed the way Kung Fu is understood here. But I think depending on who you ask and what sources you look at, that you're going to get some very different answers. So having an actual doctorate's degree in Wushu, what is your perspective on that situation? Like, how did the I think what most people believe is that before the Cultural Revolution, there were a bunch of badass Kung Fu guys who actually knew how to fight, and then it got watered down over time.
Yeah, I just don't believe it. It doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense. So easy to say, oh, back in the old days, right? First of all, no one ever quantifies the old days.
Yeah.
Right? And they were all the, and they really fought. Like, no, they didn't. So in my book, what I documented was that after the Republic of China, after the People's Republic of China starts, there is a really big martial arts competition. It's about 1954 or something like that. There's this huge one. Yeah. And they had some kind of fighting in there. But, but again, it was a small percentage of the people that did that, because Wushu is Wushu. Like, if you're doing Taolu, if you're doing the performance forms, how do you even call that in English? What do you call that? Like, the Taolu, like the performance.
I don't think we have a word for it. I mean, everybody, I think, knows what it is. It's like performance forms,
yeah,
like
these
almost
forms
like
that they
dance
do,
choreography based on martial arts.
So I think it's always been like it is today, that 90% of people that study martial arts full time are doing performance Wushu, or they're doing Tai Chi. Yeah. And then a very small percentage are doing Sanda, which is the Chinese kickboxing. And like when I did my first book, 2003, I went to Shaolin Temple. And in the Shaolin Temple, there's, at that time, there were 65 schools. Yeah. But out of all of the students, which was tens of thousands, there's one school called Tago that's really famous for Sanda, and they have like 7,000 Sanda fighters. But that's like probably 70% of the Sanda fighters in China, like, are just in this one school, because the bulk of people aren't doing that. They're doing a performance, or they're doing Tai Chi. And in the university, Sanda is under the Wushu department, but it always had a reputation of being sort of, begrudgingly accepted, because if you look at Wushu performance and you look at Tai Chi and Qigong, those are very compatible. Yeah. And a lot of people do both, or they do all of those things, and they have a lot of the same things. And so even from an academic standpoint, they were doing a lot of the same research, and they were writing about the same masters, and they were doing things. And they were all and they wear like the uniforms, and no one ever asked them to fight. And then, you go to the Sanda, and first of all, today, modern Sanda fighters, all their hand techniques are taken from boxing. Right. The better teams have actual Western boxing teachers, who come in, or the coach was trained by Western boxing,
Yeah, that's something that surprised me. I had a chance to train with a few different Sanda teams, one up in Jiangsu province, one in Shandong, and the Shanghai Sports University over with the top
Were you
team
there when Vaughn Anderson was there?
I never met him.
Okay.
Unfortunately, he wasn't there when wasn't present when I was there, but I was shocked that they cross-train in these non-Chinese martial arts like Muay Thai and boxing and even Taekwondo, and one they cross-trained in Kyokushin karate as well. And I was like, wait, what? Isn't it all Kung Fu? But apparently not.
Yeah, well, if you look at sports, like what do you call it, like fitness gyms, that open and sell lessons to people, they all offer Muay Thai and cardio Muay Thai. Well, none of these guys are trained in Muay Thai. They're all Sanda fighters. They're all, because there is no Muay Thai, and they're all Sanda. And they'll fight Muay Thai, but it's basically like fighting Muay Thai rules. It's the same way in the States that kickboxers, you sign up for a tournament, and they go, oh, it's Muay Thai rules, or it's Sanda rules, or it's whatever, and then you just adjust.
It is so different going to a American Muay Thai gym versus a actual Thai boxing camp, man.
And there's nothing like that in China. I mean, nobody here is learning Muay Thai. Yeah, I mean, a lot of them don't even know elbows at all, or clinch.
One of the big differences: Americans will spar the way the Thais fight. No, I shouldn't even say that. Americans will try to kill you in the sparring sessions.
Yeah.
Thais will play with you.
Yeah. I learned, thank God, you know, when I was training for my first MMA fights, and then that wound up setting my idea of what training is. And thank God that that was in Southeast Asia, because I learned, what, you can spar every day?
Yeah, and
I
not
didn't
get
know
killed,
that.
not get bloodied up, and not get concussed.
And you just can't. And you can spar every day because you're not killing each other. You know, there's no reason. There's no reason. You know?
Right, I just did a podcast with Jawad Mahmoudi, trying to pronounce his last name correctly, for a professional Muay Thai fighter. He's the Muay Thai coach over at Absolute MMA, and we had this whole 12-round sparring session beforehand. And when I post some sparring sessions like that on YouTube, where, you know, it's light and it's technical, and we're trying to learn and get better as fighters, instead of, you know, fighting for free for no reason whatsoever in the gym. And it shocks a lot of people. They're like, why don't you go hard? Why don't you? And
Because I want to train again tomorrow.
Exactly.
You know, when I was training in Malaysia, and Kim Lee Tan, who was one of the first ever MMA fighters in Asia, he came back to Malaysia to be my training partner. And he was the only guy that was close to my size, and he had experience. And he has a really wide variety of martial arts background. And we were training, and one day I went a little too hard, and I popped his elbow. And he said to me now, he goes, how are you going to train tomorrow? And I was like, wow. How am I going to train tomorrow? Because I just hurt my sparring partner.
Oh, man.
Like, you know, and that was a really good lesson.
Yeah, if you just, that's got to give you a pause to think.
Yep. And so ever since then, I'm really careful about that. And like right now, I teach at the school that I'm running this chain of schools. I mean, I teach economics, but I also run the gym program. And in the gym program, I have my guys learning MMA and wrestling. And there's two boys that, you know, they're training partners. And the one guy, he keeps going too hard on the other guy. I said, listen, if you hurt him, parents are either going to shut down the program, or you're not going to have anybody to train with, because he's going to be hurt, and then who are you going to train with? And he doesn't like training with me because he's terrified. So, you know.
Man, I love the example of Robbie Lawler. I mean, he's had almost like a 20-year career in full contact fighting, mixed martial arts, professional MMA. I mean, he's been fighting the UFC forever, longer than like anybody. And I mean, you see his most recent fights, and he's still spry. He's got power. He can take hits. He's got a chin, as they say. And his fights are just knockout, drag-out brawls. And people are shocked when he says, I don't spar in the gym.
Yep.
Now you can see
and
videos.
He also had one of the only successful comebacks of somebody who like disappeared for years.
Yeah.
And then came back, and I don't know if he won a title, but at least got into title contention. Like that never happens.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And he attributes it to the way that he trains.
Yeah.
And I believe it 100%. If you can see some videos of his sparring up on YouTube, like look up Robbie Lawler sparring, and then whatever the current year is, and it's light and it's technical, and they're not rocking each other, and they're pulling everything.
Yep.
And it's the way sparring should be.
Yep.
I mean, it's a beautiful thing.
You know who else stopped sparring is Cowboy.
Yeah.
Cowboy Cerrone. But we'll see how that plays out, because I know that was something I talked about. I was on a podcast when I was in Bali, and we were talking about this, that a lot of guys, when they've been fighting a long time, you've got skills, you've got knowledge, you've got all this going on, and then you suddenly make some crazy change to what you're doing, and you win your next few fights, and people go, oh, it works in spite of making this crazy. It's like, yeah, but he's got 30 years of experience.
Yeah. So something that Robbie Lawler says, I don't get into fights in the gym. I already know how to fight.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuck with me. I already know how to fight. I don't need to keep doing it in the gym.
But I feel like that now. You know, I'm hopefully fighting in January. Well, so it looked like going to Malaysia to fight in March. Definitely. I'm talking to somebody here in Shanghai about maybe fighting in China, and then now it looks like in Weifang they might be able to arrange some fights for me in January and February. And but anyway, the point of the story is, I'm 51 years old.
Yeah.
So. I'm approaching it very differently. And that's one of the things. I absolutely refuse to get hurt in training.
Yeah, smart.
Yeah, I want to get hurt in the ring.
Yeah.
Well, I don't really want to. But
if it happens, you want it to be there.
Thank you. Yeah, seriously, I'm not going to benefit anybody by getting hurt in training. And so I'm not going to do that. I'm not really sparring per se. We're doing mostly wrestling. And that's the other thing that we worked out my strategy. My strategy is just Greco, 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 strength, 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 you know, and then clinch. And I don't know that I really need to spar to do that, you know.
Yeah.
You know.
Man, grappling is awesome because if you approach it intelligently, it's something you can do every day, close to full speed, close to full contact, close to full power.
Yeah, that's what Joe Rogan always talks about too. That's another reason why BJJ is just such a great thing, is because it's literally the only fight sport where you can go full power, full speed, and you don't have to worry about hurting anybody.
I know. That's why it always makes me laugh a little bit whenever I visit a jiu-jitsu gym and they're like, all right, guys, only 50%. I'm like, what?
50% of what?
50% of what?
What does that mean?
50% of a guard pass, 50% of, yeah.
You know, I don't remember if we were on the air or off the air. I mean, if it was the 13th or 14th podcast, because we've done both.
Oh, yeah,
today.
yeah. We've done 2 so far.
But that was something that came up, was about trying to teach wrestling to the jiu-jitsu / MMA guys. And one of the frustrations I have when I'm in those gyms, today's no gi day, and, you know, we're going to work on wrestling, and so I want you to start from standing when you do your sparring. I'm like, that's really good.
Yeah.
But you have guys that pull guard. And I'm like,
Yeah.
you're learning nothing. Did you know how to pull guard before you came here today? Yes? Okay, then you don't need to practice that. Practice the takedown. You know, and they're not practicing the takedown. And, of course, for MMA, when we talked about that already, pulling guard's just not a very good idea.
Yeah, it's hard to step out of a comfort zone once you find that thing you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
Like, man, my first martial art was Taekwondo, which is all kicks. I mean, you can punch the body, but nobody does. And so transitioning to kickboxing was weird, man.
Yeah,
and
sure.
then trying to learn how to box for the first time was so, my body just rejected it at first. I mean, I love it now, but it was like, no.
Did you see what happened? You know about Kyokushin, right? And then there's this program in Japan where you live in the dojo for 3 years, and they just beat the crap out of you for 3 years, and they only accept like a few people a year, and you live at the actual headquarters, like the, what do they call it? Hongban, maybe Hongban.
Okay.
Like, it's like the, anyway, and you live there, and you just go through this like horrible thing, and then at the end of it, like, you're a black belt, and you're like a complete badass, and they have you fight, like for the black belt, then you fight the 50-man, or I don't know, 50-man or 100-man, yeah, something like that. Maybe it's 50 now, or 20 probably even, because they've cut it.
I think like only like 12 guys have completed the 100-man kumite officially.
Yeah, because it used to be 100, and then they keep cutting it, you know, so now maybe it's like 3 guys, I don't know.
Man, those are interesting to watch. You can see like a few of them on YouTube.
So
like all 100 fights.
The first foreigner to ever complete it, his name is Jude something or another. He's British.
Yeah.
And his thing was he wants to be an MMA fighter.
Yeah.
So he goes through that program. And that program is sick. I mean, Kyokushin is absolutely sick.
Yeah.
Devastating. You see them train, you see them sparring, you go, no man alive can beat them, except there's one problem. They don't punch in the face.
Yeah.
For some reason, they don't punch in the face. And so he came out of that, and he tried to do MMA, and he couldn't do it. And then he wound up doing one of those videos and movies and a book where he did either 50 or 100-man kumite.
Oh, man.
Yeah, and I haven't seen the documentary, but there's like a documentary about him doing the kumite. It's sort of like he couldn't do MMA. Oh, I'm going to go do this other amazing thing that nobody's ever done. You know?
Why not, man?
Yeah,
go make that money.
Yeah, I got full respect for him, but it's just really interesting that, you know, if a guy who goes through that can't transition to MMA, this tells you it's not an easy transition.
Yeah, the great limiting factor in mixed martial arts is time. And if you spend a great deal of time mastering this one thing, it can be extremely difficult to transition to something that is the polar opposite of that. So in many ways, wrestling is the polar opposite of jiu-jitsu. Boxing is the polar opposite of taekwondo, and so on.
Yep.
And so we almost develop a psychological dependence on that comfort zone, on that thing that we're good at.
Yep.
So I'll get a lot of questions from my viewers saying, should I master one art before moving on to the next if I want to be a pro MMA fighter?
That's pretty funny.
Like, oh, okay. Well, no, because you're going to spend your entire lifetime trying to master something.
Yeah, that's right.
And you'll never get around to it if you don't learn the next thing until you master the first thing. But at the same time, you know, really all the separations between fighting styles are artificially imposed.
Yeah, I don't know. I go back and forth on that. You know,
Yeah.
every year my opinion changes. Bruce Lee, something really interesting. Only one of the biographies that I read, but it's supposedly one of the better ones.
Yeah.
One of the biographies said that when he came up with the whole philosophy of, you know, throw away all the classical mess and just teach the effective techniques, and it worked really well with his students. And apparently, though, but his first batch of students were like world-class martial artists. I mean, Dan Inosanto and what's his name, Taki Gomori, or you know, whatever, like the Japanese karate guy, and they were all like, and he
already knew how to fight, basically.
Yes, and that was his thing. Was like he realized, like late in his life, like had he lived, they believe he would have changed again his philosophy, because when he threw away all the classical mess, and these guys learned quickly, but they had a lifetime of martial art behind them. When he went and tried to teach normal people, he suddenly realized that they had no basis, they had no background. And this is a conversation.
It's a whole different animal.
Yeah, that's a conversation I have with my coach in Malaysia. We have this conversation all the time, because me and him were older. So he was a professional Muay Thai fighter who learned jiu-jitsu and then became an MMA guy. You know, I was a boxer, and then I learned martial arts and became an MMA guy. And it's like, there's kids today that their first martial art. Well, you know, you're teaching people. There's people that their first martial art is walking into an MMA gym, and we're debating about whether or not that's a good thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of value in structure, man. When I started coaching mixed martial arts, I opened up my first gym back in the U.S., and I had a bunch of wrestlers come to my gym because I offered free training. Like, hey, come to my gym. Let's try out this experiment. And a bunch of guys who wrestled in high school came to my gym, and I found it was really easy for me to teach, you know, decent high school wrestlers how to compete in entry-level mixed martial arts, because they had that excellent base.
Yes.
And then when I came here to China and started teaching people from scratch who had no idea what MMA even was, who had never seen,
and often had never played any sports.
Yes, exactly.
Have no muscle tone.
It's a
How the hell do you have
whole
no
different
muscle
thing.
tone?
For a moment, I was like, man, I thought I was a good coach.
Yeah.
What happened? What
Yes.
happened? So I realized, no, I've got to approach this differently. One really, really valuable thing I learned from my dance degree, and this is how I bring this into mixed martial arts, modern dance versus classical ballet, and I've danced professionally in both. Classical ballet is all about structure. If you don't move your arm in this very specific way, it's not ballet. If you ask, people always say, well, what's the difference between that and modern dance? And modern dance can be anything. Any type of movement can be modern dance. But if there's no structure, it's garbage.
Right.
You have to have structure to create something beautiful.
Yes.
And it's exactly the same with mixed martial arts. Mixed martial arts can be any type of attack, any type of, well, as long as it's not in the list of fouls, it can be, it's this huge, broad skill set.
Yes.
Anything can work, basically. Except everything doesn't work without the structure.
That's right.
Man, I had this this Aikido guy come to my gym, an Aikido black belt, this little dude from Greece, and he trained at the gym for a few weeks, and then while sparring, I saw him.
Well, you obviously didn't spar him, or you would be dead. They can't spar. I love that. We can't spar because our techniques are too deadly.
This guy was interesting because one, he was an Aikido guy who actually came to train in mixed martial arts. But I'm watching him spar one day, and he pulls off one of those flippy Aikido throws that you see like in those demos, and I've never seen anybody do one of those against even a mildly resisting total beginner. But he did, and I pulled him aside afterward, and I said, I commented, I was like, that's crazy. I've never seen anybody do that against, you know, not in Aikido demo. And he said, well, here's the thing. Aikido only works if you already know how to fight. And that's why I'm taking.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's why I'm taking this class, so I can learn how to fight, so I can use my Aikido.
Because he that shall not be named, he actually pulled off an Aikido like a wrist lock on me sparring. And we were sparring. I mean, we were going pretty hard, and he caught me and did an Aikido wrist lock from standing and took me down. And I was like shocked. And one other guy, there was a guy like a Central Asian guy, like a Kazakh or something at that gym, and he did one of those one time, and I was like shocked because I've almost never seen an Aikido technique work in real fighting.
Wrist locks are interesting because they are legit moves. We don't see them very often, especially in MMA because of all the wraps and stuff on the hands. and it's very, very difficult to pull them off against somebody who isn't already pinned.
Or someone who's punching you.
Or somebody who's punching you, exactly.
Hitting you with elbows in the face.
Man, I tell this story so much on my videos about this time I met this old Tai Chi master up in Jiangsu province. The guy was 80 years old, and he wanted to spar with me, and I thought he wanted to do the stupid pushing hands thing. But no, he actually wanted to spar.
Oh, my goodness.
So I come in there gingerly trying to do the pushing hands thing, and he throws me on the ground.
Nice.
Like hard, and we're sparring on like stone tiles, and I get up like, oh man, that hurt my elbow, and he's like, this time again with power, and every time I lay a hand on him, he would catch that hand and like lock it and lock the elbow and lock the shoulder and toss me on the ground.
But you weren't really like
not at first. Not at first. It wasn't until I had been thrown like 10 times.
After he'd humiliated you.
I was bruised up and beaten from being tossed on the ground so many times. Now, I didn't speak like any Chinese back then. This was like 10 years ago. And there's this translator saying, he says, fight, like really fight. Like do that UFC stuff. Punch, kick, takedown, whatever. I'm like, all right, fine. So I come at him and I start punching, and he's just standing there in a parallel stance, like just slipping, moving his head around really fast like this. And as soon as I laid hands on him, just like that crossing swords analogy, it becomes a grappling situation. As soon as I laid hands on him, he started grappling. Boom! I hit the ground again, and he's got me in a shoulder lock, and it was mind-blowing for a bunch of reasons. One, he was old, but very, very fit.
Yeah.
I mean, you need to be an athlete. You need to be physically fit, at least to a certain degree, to be able to do martial arts well. Now, I know we said that thing about jiu-jitsu, but if you're in a wheelchair attached to an oxygen tank, you're not going to do anything well, athletically. But I was shocked to learn that there is so much grappling in Tai Chi, in Tai Chi Chuan.
So when I lived in Taiwan, they do two-hand tueso, which in China they often do just the one hand. And what was really interesting was there were, in the competitions, because it's a big thing in Taiwan, they have the competitions. And number one was, I was looking at it going, wow, at that time I didn't know how to grapple, but I was thinking, it seems like you would be able to use that like in, MMA type grappling. Because so much of it was, as soon as the guy touches you and your body just turns into rubber. You push on the guy, his body turns into rubber, and you fall flat on your face kind of thing. And that was one. The other interesting thing, though, was that there seemed to be a turning point going on in Taiwan, that there were some young guys that were actually like taking, I believe they were even taking steroids, but they were definitely taking like whey proteins and all this creatine and all this other stuff. But I think they may also have been taking drugs. And they were lifting weights. And there were old men that were in the park, doing their thing. And they were meeting in competition, and the results were like 50-50. That these huge, scary men, young men, were only winning like 50% of the time against these old men. But what I wrote an article about it for Black Belt at the time, and I said, but the one thing is, the guy who was lifting weights like that, he had like, in 6 months he got to that level, whereas if you're doing it naturally by doing forms, it takes a lifetime.
Yeah, there's this concept called old man strength, and it's a real thing. Steroids, they will make the muscles grow. Actual hard work over long periods of time strengthens the connective tissue and the joints, which is where the real strength comes from. The strength through, grip strength, for example. You can't get that from steroids. You have to get that from hard work over long periods of time.
Well, I don't think any athletes, except like people that are taking steroids and doing like bodybuilding, I don't think anybody else gets things like where the bicep pops out of the, rips through the skin and pops out, right? Or where he goes to lift something and the arm breaks because the bones and the connective tissue are not as strong as the muscle, right? So that supports what you're saying, right? Like if we build strength naturally, everything grows at the same rate, I would assume,
Oh, man. It is one of the follies of youth to underestimate the strength of the old. Fascinating study I read a few years ago, and I wish I could find a link to it to put in the description, but it shocked me to learn that the peak levels of human strength are achievable between ages 35 and 50.
Yeah, I believe that. I believe that. Yeah. Well, and MMA has proved a lot of the MMA and grappling both have proved a lot of this, because when I look at a guy in his early 20s, I just assume he's probably not that good. You know, he just hasn't had the years, you know. But in other sports, obviously, a guy in his 20s, he's faster, he's more agile than I am. But in MMA or grappling, you know, he probably just doesn't have the experience. How could he? You know,
it's actually shocking to me. Like when I sparred with Jawad, he's 23 years old, and the guy is just phenomenal. And you know, we chatted afterward, and he's just got this fight IQ of somebody like 20 years older than him.
Yeah,
and that might be shocking to a lot of people, like, well, of course he's good and fast and all these things. Yeah, he's athletic, and a lot of young people are, but the fight IQ is a whole different thing.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing.
Like, he understands things that took me 20 years to get as such a young man, and beyond that in so many ways.
This has been, so you've been coaching people in China, and I've been coaching all around Asia, and one of the frustrating things that I have is, you know, we talked about, okay, you look at the Kyokushin, this guy that went through this horrible program that would kill most people, and he gets through it, and then he can't fight MMA. And in the early days of MMA in Asia, Americans, Europeans were going to Thailand, going, oh, these guys, they have 150, 200, 300 fights. They're hitting each other knees and elbows. My God, we're just going to teach them to grapple, and then they're going to win. And like to date, like, no Thai person has won anything ever anywhere. Like, there's just no way to get them to try. And part of the issue, though, that I find, because I spend so much time in Cambodia, and I was on the first Cambodian professional MMA team. I was on Team Cambodia, you know, and I had so much trouble teaching my teammates because they have no fight IQ.
Yeah.
Which is weird.
It's super weird.
Guy's got 300 fights, but he has no fight IQ.
I knew a guy, Arthur Hanchana. He's a fantastic Muay Thai fighter. He came over here to China to do some kickboxing and also MMA. And the guy is just a total badass as far as Muay Thai. And, you know, you would think, like, the Thai clinch, at which he was an
exactly.
expert.
I know, because the Thai clinch, that was one of my things. I'm like, the Thai clinch is 70% of what you need for grappling.
Yeah, the transition from there to guard work or guard passing or whatever should be simple.
And I feel like I fight better in MMA because of the years I spent in Thailand and Cambodia learning Thai clinch. But meanwhile...
Yeah, this guy never had a good MMA fight ever.
Isn't that bizarre?
And you'd look at his pro record and you'd think, well, this guy sucks. And no, this guy is an absolute amazing world-class fighter on his feet. But man,
it's so weird. I don't know. Like one of the TV shows that we did for the States. So there was a show that they have two guys. They go around the world learning martial arts, and then they fight at the end of the show. So I was training. One of my friends was picked to be the one that had to fight the American. And I go, look, these Americans, they all know MMA. I go, but you can kick harder than any human being like that they've ever met, you know, with your shins. I go, what I want you to do is get in there, kick him with your shin and move. Kick him with your shin and move. Don't do anything. I don't want to see you do anything else. Kick with the shin and move. So we're sparring, and I'm putting in other fighters with him, and he'd kick with the shin and move once. And then he would do something else. I'm like, no, don't do something else. Just kick with your shin and move. Oh, okay. And then he'd like do it again. And they just kept doing it wrong. And I'm like, how? I'm telling you the simplest thing in the world. Kick and move. Kick him. Okay, kick and don't move. No. Kick and move. Kick and stay there. No. Kick and move.
Long-term habits are so hard to break. And that's one thing a lot of people don't understand about doing film studies for fighters. They look at their opponents' fight videos and they try to find mistakes.
Yes.
When what they really need to do is find as many fight videos going back and look for patterns, look for tendencies that stick with them, look for the long-term habits.
That's right.
Like, what were they doing when they were fighting 10 years ago that they're still doing today?
Yes.
That's the stuff you can exploit.
That's true. That's a very good point. Yeah.
So...
Yeah, I've just found, and the other thing about fight IQ, when you teach people that are starting with zero, you know, like you said, that's a weird one for me. Like, at my school, you know, so I was teaching one of the kids jiu-jitsu, and he rolls over in such a fashion that I'm on top of him. And I go, so I said to him, I said, well, think about this. Do you want me on top or on the bottom?
Yeah.
Do you know what he said? Because I don't know.
Oh, wow.
He's like, yeah, I don't know. I don't have a lot of experience. And I'm like, wow. Like, I would think it would just be obvious that you don't want to be on the bottom. But you know what? You know, you shouldn't think anything's obvious, right?
I had a student like that once. It was perplexing. Like, you know, perfectly able-bodied guy, but I'd give him simple instructions like, all right, move your hand this way. And he would say, how? Like,
This way.
Focus with your mind until the hand starts to move. Oh, man.
The neurovasodilators. This is Joe Rogan said, like, people who do fake martial arts, that's like one of the things is that they always use like biology terms. Yeah. Well, you know, this particular strike activates the neurovasodilator.
Oh, man.
Of the vagus.
The vagus nerve in the neck. Oh, man. I love looking at terrible self-defense videos. And
I loved your series, by the way, of terrible self-defense. I love that. I love that.
I'm working on another one right now about self-defense techniques that require you to be stronger than the other guy to arm wrestle him to work, because there are so many of those.
I found a Chinese, what I thought was a knife defense video, but it was if you have a knife and your opponent doesn't.
That changes everything. Oh, wow.
Hey, actually, one of your techniques, I actually teach it. I actually use it in what I'm teaching.
Yeah.
When because the whole thing is when the Greco-Roman wrestlers get behind you, you're absolutely screwed. The second he clasps his hands, you're screwed because you're going for a ride, right?
Yeah.
So teaching guys how to break that. And in your self-defense video, there was the one apparently they teach women, and I remembered it after you did it, and I went, yeah, I remember this girl telling me that. But they teach women that when somebody grabs you from behind, that you just sit down.
Oh, yeah, like go limp.
Yeah, just like go limp and sit down, and then you see, and I escape. It's like, well, yeah, but now you're laying on the ground, and the guy's going to beat you up. But yeah, but I teach my students that. I show them
gotta
that.
Go limp, hook the leg, sit out, work around the back. But yeah, it's so much harder to lift dead weight than it is somebody who is rigid and stiff and supporting their own weight. I mean, this is something I learned in ballet class, man. Because if you're a dude in ballet class, the first thing you have to learn is lifting humans.
Yes. And
the first thing a woman has to learn being lifted is to maintain stress and rigidity in the body.
Yep.
Because if they just relax, it's like lifting a sack of water, basically.
Well, Jake the Snake body slammed Andre the Giant.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. When you go to pro wrestling school, you have to learn both of those positions, how to be lifted and how to lift. And Jake was like, if Andre didn't want me to lift him, I couldn't have. But it was a show, you know, and Andre knew how to do it, you know.
Yeah, it is a very particular skill set. Man, let's talk about the Shaolin Temple.
Sure.
Because you have some experience there. You trained there.
Yeah.
And everybody keeps asking me, Ramsey, you're in China. Tell us about the Shaolin Temple. I've never been there. I've never been up to it. Is it in Henan?
Yeah, it's in Henan.
Okay. Yeah,
and actually, one of the things we talked about a minute ago reminds me of Shaolin. Yeah. We talked about the importance of having a base. Do you know that most of the Sanda fighters, most of the career track Sanda fighters, whether they're going through Tago at Shaolin Temple or they're going to sports school, do you know that most of them, the first 2 years, they do Wushu Taolu?
Really?
Yeah, they do performance forms for 2 years before they ever learn to fight.
Oh.
And one of there's two reasons. One is that in the Shaolin Temple, I actually saw them making cuts that they were like, look, your Taolu is terrible. You're never going to be a good performer, so we'll put you in the Sanda program. That was part of it. But part of it was that to be a really good Sanda fighter, if you had that 2 years of experience in Wushu, you were so much better because you had the leaps, you had the flexibility, you had the high kicks.
They're training them how to move.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And my training, so my Sanda trainer at the Sport University was not from Shaolin. There were a lot of people from Shaolin, though.
Right.
So I studied at Shaolin in 2003. And then 2013, Black Belt Magazine said to me, hey, you know what? It's been 10 years. Why don't you go back and do like a 10-year? So I did. I went back and I did another thing and did another 10-year story. But then I went straight from that to the Sport University. So when I came to Sports University, I was wearing a lot of my Shaolin like T-shirts and stuff. And there were always guys that would come up to me and I grew up in the Shaolin Temple and now I'm at Sports University. And my coach was, for a Chinese guy, he was very big. He was like he's over 6 feet tall and he was probably like 180, like 85 kgs. He could do backflips, front flips, somersaults. And you could we do this drill. They do this drill in the Sanda training where you hold the guy's leg up on your shoulder or on your chest and try and make him fall down. And they time it like 3 minutes. Like you just run around like pulling his leg every which way.
And he's just like balancing on one leg.
Okay. Yeah. And he attributes that to the 2 years that he spent, from like age 9 to age 10 or 11 or 12 or whatever. That was all Wushu.
Oh, that makes sense. Gymnastics is such a huge advantage in combat sports.
Yep.
And the difference between training somebody who knows how to move, even if it's like a non-combat sport related thing, and teaching somebody who doesn't know how to move is tremendous.
Yep.
Like I've had the opportunity to train different athletes from different sports. Like there's this girl, Karen. She's in a couple of my videos. This little Chinese girl, but she plays tennis.
Yep.
And she played tennis at a fairly high level for a long time, and she just picks things up.
Yeah.
She pays attention, but she picks things up in ways that other people don't, faster than most other people do.
Well, it's like in the UFC, the Brazilians that have a background in soccer tend to do really well, and then Americans that played pro football or football at college level, they tend to do really well. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. If you have the movement, which is one of the reasons why judo, because I talked about this in my book, that judo on paper should be like the best martial art on the planet, and somehow it's not. And there's a lot of issues with judo, and that may actually be one of them. It may have to do with movement, because Sanda fighters, it's a pleasure to teach MMA to Sanda fighters, because basically they've got 70% of what they need. You know, Sanda I don't know if that's been your experience, but
no, that sounds about right, man. That sounds about right.
Whereas teaching judo players has just been like, you know,
that is an interesting observation, because judo like technically does so many things right and so many things good, and there is such a small list of judo players who've transitioned successfully into mixed martial arts.
First of all, essentially every, you know, I'm going to say essentially, right? Maybe it's 90%, but essentially every Japanese person that ever fought in the UFC has a black belt in judo. Because it's a school sport, and you choose either judo or kendo, and most of them, the ones we see, are the ones who chose judo. So that means every Japanese fighter who ever got knocked out had a black belt in judo. You know, and the only judo players that were real, that was their primary martial art, like Karl Parisian and Manny Gambirian, and I don't think either of them ever became champions. It became contenders.
Yeah.
But I don't think
Dong Hyun Kim, the Korean judoka. I was really pulling for that guy. I wanted him to. He's like one of the few fighters I really wanted him to win and do really well, and he just never really had his moment.
Well, it's only been, if I'm not mistaken, there's only been 2 Japanese that have ever held UFC titles.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, and then from the whole of Asia, I think those might even be the only 2. I'm not sure, but judo just doesn't translate for some reason. And the weird thing, the other weird one, just before we talk about Shaolin, I just got to throw this out there. I had a training mate in Malaysia named Ken, and he was trained. There was a Japanese jiu-jitsu, which apparently is essentially dead today. There's almost no real Japanese jiu-jitsu. There are some schools that call themselves Japanese jiu-jitsu.
And they're all in the U.S. and Europe.
And they're not the real thing. Apparently, if you read Jigoro Kano's book, because I'm doing the whole thing now, I'm reading all the founders. This is amazing. All the Japanese martial arts were codified at the same time. And the founders all knew each other. The Jigoro Kano knew the founder of Okinawan Karate. I forgot his name right now, Fukunaki or whatever. Like, they knew each other. Like, all these guys knew each other. And basically what happened was...
get an angry comment saying, I can't believe you don't know his name.
How do you not know everybody's name? No, but apparently in Japan, there was essentially one martial art, and it was jiu-jitsu. And it had everything in there. There was throws, submissions, even kicks and punches. And so, like, the guy who thought that kicking and punching was better, he went off and, developed like a karate style. And then Jigoro Kano said, throwing, and he did judo. And that's why judo has less submissions and no strikes, But anyway, apparently if you were actually a black belt in real Japanese jiu-jitsu, you were a freaking unbeatable machine. So I had a friend in Malaysia that his master was a really old Japanese guy, and I think he's either since died or just hasn't had students in many years, but they taught real Japanese jiu-jitsu. They fought with MMA gloves before there was MMA. They could kick, punch, throw. And I would get in the ring with this guy, and he had that Lyoto Machida thing where you can't land any kicks or punches on him.
Oh, yeah.
Because of that weird movement and stance. And I couldn't take him down. I couldn't. If I grabbed him, either I was going for a ride or he was just going to laugh until he, hit me. And it was unbelievable. And on the ground, it was the same thing. He just had phenomenal ground. But he was a black belt in jiu-jitsu. And then the other funny thing, and this is a teachable moment for 2 reasons. So one is that there is this ancient art, but there's not many people today that actually practice it.
Right.
The other teachable moment the Ken takeaway is that my friend Ken had a phenomenal build. He was in great shape. He had this incredible skill. Nobody in the gym could lay a glove on him. He had 2 professional MMA fights, and he quit.
Oh, yeah?
During the fights. He
quit
had
during fights?
no heart to fight.
Oh, wow.
And this guy would spar. And we loved having him in the gym, and we were so grateful to have him because he would spar everybody. You know, oh, we get 20 rounds of sparring tonight. Ken's here.
Yeah.
He couldn't fight.
That is an interesting observation because, man, fighting is about so much more than just being technical and physical and all of this. Because if you look at some of the most successful fighters in MMA, they're like bumblebees. You hear that old urban legend about how bumblebees shouldn't be able to fly because they're not aerodynamic or they're too heavy or their wings are too small. Probably not true because they can fly, but they're like bumblebees from that urban legend. Like you look at a guy like, say, Forrest Griffin, for example. I'm not taking any away from him. He's
right.
But he was never the best boxer. He was never the best wrestler.
Well, he wasn't even a martial artist, I believe, before he learned MMA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that dude had heart, man. He had heart.
And he won. I mean, the only time in history that they gave him and his opponent the contract.
Yeah.
You know, because it was just such a phenomenal fight.
That's one of those guys where you would actually have to kill him to stop him.
Yep.
Well, or knock him out like Anderson Silva did. But
yeah, no. But that's a very good observation that you made. Yeah. Like I look at, there's certain fighters who, and again, I don't want to take anything away from them because they're phenomenal, but I can't learn anything from GSP. I can't learn anything from GSP. I can't learn anything from John Bones Jones. These are 2 men who could do things that you and I can't do.
Yeah, like
normal people
jump into somebody's guard and like, all right, jump into his guard and then squish him. Like, oh, what if he's the best jiu-jitsu guy in the world?
Whereas I look at a Daniel Cormier and I go, if you trained your whole life wrestling and that strength and that power, you could, like, it can be done. It can be done. Like GSP, that's like something else from some other planet. You know, him and John Bones Jones inventing techniques and doing weird stuff. Like GSP, like whenever I used to talk about traditional martial arts, Lyoto Machida was the only one, until very recently, Lyoto Machida was one of the only fighters in the UFC who claimed a traditional martial art background, represented a traditional martial art, and when you watched him fight,
you could see it.
You could see it. And he was one of the only ones where that was true. And people would always say, well, what about GSP? He has a Kyokushin background. Show me 1 second of a GSP fight.
Exactly.
It looks
or Chuck Liddell, I mean, Kenpo karate black belt, but he wasn't knocking people out with Kenpo karate.
No, but, in Chuck Liddell, I'd even give you maybe even like a second. Like I'd say Lyoto Machida number 1. Yeah, Chuck Liddell. Maybe there's something about the way Chuck moved probably that was Kenpo. I don't know. But, another one is Kong Lee, who I love. I love Kong Lee, right? If you watch he's the most dominant Sanda fighter, arguably, he's ever lived. He's completely undefeated. He won Sanda matches on suplexes.
Yeah.
Right? Goes into MMA, and I mean, he wasn't bad, but he wasn't a phenomenal MMA fighter. He never won a UFC title. He won a title, I believe, in Strikeforce or something. And I mean, I love him, but if you look at his record in MMA, it's mixed, whereas his record in Sanda is just 100% dominant.
Yeah. It's one of those unfortunate things. I wish Sherdog had footnotes in the fight records. Like, this guy also is, world champion kickboxer or whatever. Like, take, for example, Ramon Dekkers, one of the greatest kickboxers of all time, rest his soul. You look up his Sherdog record, because he did, I think, 1 or 2 MMA fights.
Oh,
he fought
is that right?
Kaoru Uno, that Japanese guy, and just got tooled on the ground because he didn't know how to grapple. And you look him up on Sherdog, and it looks like, oh, this guy sucks.
Yeah, right.
And I just wish there was a footnote. Like, no, he actually doesn't. He's awesome. And this guy's a legend.
Yeah, I mean, he's up there, right? Like Ramon Dekker, John Wayne Parr. What's it? Andy Zawa, right? Are those kind of the big names?
Yeah.
I don't know if those are still the big names.
Andy Sauer, he's still teaching.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't follow more. What I do like about MMA versus anything else is because of Sherdog. The record's out there. Nobody can lie about their record, which is nice, and you can prove it. When you You know, when you make a claim, hey, I can prove it. It's on my shirt, dog. I like that. Whereas Muay Thai, you know, I kind of feel bad for the guys because there's guys out there with 80 fights, and like there's no record of it anywhere. There's a couple of cell phone videos, maybe. You know,
especially if they started fighting like more than 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah,
when nobody had a cell phone with a camera.
Yep.
And people now they just take it for granted that everybody is carrying around a high definition photo studio in their pocket. And 10 years ago, that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
Like, man, I wish I had videos of most of my old fights. I
Yeah,
got a few little fight clips. And
I don't have any videos of my boxing fights. You know, I know that at least 2 videos exist. I was in Thailand one time signing up for a fight, and someone came up to me and a Thai guy, and he goes, "Oh, I saw you fight like 3 years ago. It's on my phone," and he showed it to me. And this was at a time when I didn't even know that like phones could do video.
Oh, wow.
And at the time, I didn't know how to say to him like, "Oh, can you give me that?" Because at that time, I don't know how you would have given me that video. But I would love to have that video.
File sharing was different back then. Now it's just like click a button, boom, let me airdrop it to you.
Exactly.
And I, at risk of sounding like an old man telling old man stories about when I was your age, I'm totally that old man right now. When I was your age, it wasn't like this.
How old are you, by the way?
40 years old.
Are you 40?
Yeah.
You're young.
Yeah. That's what I keep telling That's what I keep telling people. They're like, you're 40. Oh, good job, old man. Still doing martial arts. Good job. Pat on the back. Like, 40 is not that old, guys.
I know. That's the Nico, the coach in Bali. You know, he always says that to me. He's like, oh, I hope I'm as good as you guys when I'm old. I'm like, first of all, you're better than us, and you're like 40 now. like I can't imagine that by the time he's 50, he's gonna be bad.
You know? I think, especially in American culture, we're so used to seeing people give up on physical culture early on, like right after high school or right after college, and by the time people are 30. They have the athleticism of a...
I'm sorry, sir. That's a bias that is not supported by any evidence, especially in America compared to where?
Oh, man.
Compared to where that people are still competing. People compete. My brother is 62. My brother competes once a month in triathlon. Every January, he makes a schedule. He does 12 every year. Now, America is a country where people compete into very, very much later than... In China,
Touché.
China, you have to retire. Well, first of all, you have to retire when you're 23.
Touche.
You know, so I mean, there's.
I guess the point I'm trying to express is that people, probably worldwide, are just used to older people just being sedentary.
Yeah.
And when you see older people being sedentary as the norm, anything that's the exception to that is going to blow your mind.
Yeah.
But the truth of it is, if you use your body adapts to the demands you put on it.
Right.
You know, within reason, of course.
So when I'm home, I do this. They have me on this radio show on Long Island, and they always ask me about China. You know, so that's one of the things about sports. So let me ask you, because you're from the States.
Yeah.
You go to an American high school chosen at random. You select 100 kids at random. What percentage of them are athletes?
Ooh, 100 kids. Wow. Thinking about my own high school and how many kids were actually athletic back there. 15.
You think?
15 out of 100.
Really?
Like, what level of athletes are we talking about? Like guys who can play high school football? Or
yeah, let's say that they're either on a high school team or they're on the travel teams, because that's like the new thing now. They're all on these travel teams where they pay money outside to do soccer and gymnastics and other sports, or they're doing martial arts, which is outside of school.
Like in a high school today, I don't know.
100. I mean, way more than 15. It would have to be. Just high school sports would be more than 15.
Okay, what would you say?
So, you know what? I don't have a good number, but I will say this. I went to a high school that had 1,500 students, right? Well, your football team has 100 people on it.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's your...
my hometown didn't even have 1,500 people. You know, it had like 800 people when it was
just
born.
Just the football team.
1,000 people when I left.
Just the football, you know, and there's eight sports for boys, 8 sports for girls. So already just the teams, it's already like 300 kids. So that's already like 30% of the kids, you know. You know, whatever, 20% of the kids right there. And then how many are doing other sports outside? But it's a lot. Okay, now, you've been in China a long time. I go to a Chinese high school, pick 100 kids, what percentage are doing sports?
Ooh. Probably close to zero.
Very close to zero, right? Yeah. So that's why I think there's a lot of self-loathing self-loathing in media reporting from the States, and I think Americans are just conditioned to like say horrible things, you know, about themselves or about America. Oh,
Yeah.
Americans, oh, we're all fat. Nobody does any sports. Really? Go to China. 0% of kids are playing sports. Zero.
Yeah.
You told me 15% of your high school. Then I believe the number is higher, but let's go with 15%. How many times do I have to multiply 0 times infinity to get to 15? Zero will never reach infinity. Yeah, I mean, you know,
that is an
zero.
awesome point. I mean, now that you mention that,
15.
just thinking about, like, I went to a really small high school in a really small town, but yeah, come to think of it, like, how many of the kids in my high school actually did play sports? Probably most of them.
Most, because just your high school sports teams would already have accounted for like 30% of the kids.
And we had a wrestling team, we had a football team, baseball team, track and field, you know, all the
And track and
standard
field's
sports.
huge.
Yeah.
You can have at least 40. You can have at least 20 boys and 20 girls on the track team.
So come to think of it,
You know?
me and the group of misfit nerds who didn't play sports, I think there were like 12 of us. Whoa, that explains so much about why I got picked up on and beaten up in high school, man.
Now you look at things like races, like 10Ks, 5Ks. How many 10K, 5Ks are there in Shanghai versus how many are there in New York?
Oh, wow.
Or a big city, or even a medium-sized city in the state, a small city in the States. How
that's
many
a
5K,
Good question.
10K?
They got races going on all the time in New York, don't they?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. New York. I mean, every single weekend there's track races, there's road races, there's whatever. Because I used to run on the circuit, you know. And then you compare to Shanghai, how many? And then look at age divisions. Like my brother runs in the 62. He's 62 years old, right? So my brother told me when he was in his 30s. He said, yeah, he goes, 30s is a weird thing because what you said, that a lot of guys, you graduate high school or college and then you stop playing sports and you get married. You have your first job, you're very busy, and you get married and you have your first kid, all kind of around the same. So and you just like get fat, right? And he goes, so the 30s division wasn't very competitive because then you got to 40s and you start getting like hardcore older guys and gals.
Oh, yeah.
You know, who trained really hard. And he goes, 40s was really competitive. And then what he said, though, that what happened was it's his generation. So when his generation turned 50, the 50 generation was like really rough. And the 60s now are really rough. Yeah.
This reminds me of a conversation I had with my friend Matt. I did a podcast with him a while back. He's a jiu-jitsu competitor, started in his 50s, started
in his 50s.
Started training in his 50s.
Show me the guy in Asia who started competing in his 50s.
And the guy's like, you know, he's world champion in his division in the like Master 7 division. That's like old guys division, super old guys division in the IBJJF. But he says everybody thinks like it's going to be easy competing in the really old guys division. They're like, oh, they'll take it easy. But you look at the physiques on some of these guys. They're like old school, like iron workers and things like that, with just like bodies of Greek gods, and you just wonder like, but he's old.
Yeah.
But
no, that's it. That's in Asia. I mean, I've never fought anybody even remotely close to my age. I mean, and the guys I was fighting. So when I was fighting pro,
yeah,
all those guys are retired already. They were 20. They were half my age then.
Yeah,
and they're already retired. Yeah, I'm the only one who's certainly still training at this level, and then hopefully going to be competing soon. But it's no. I mean Americans, Westerners in general, but Americans, we compete into a much older age. We do also have very high obesity rates, but you know what? Urban obesity around the globe is essentially the same. It's normalizing. Like even Bangkok has it appears that somewhere around 20% is normal urban obesity rate. And even like Bangkok, which is generally considered, you know, one of the, you know, cities where everybody's like really skinny.
Yeah,
even they're getting up there. And Malaysia now has higher obesity than the States, higher diabetes.
That's true.
Well.
Now that you mention it, like obesity, when I first came here to China, I was shocked at how few obese people I saw compared to in the U.S. But now, like 10 years later, just walking around Shanghai, I'm starting to notice it more. I mean, not like giant, corpulent, morbidly obese people everywhere, but just people seem to be getting fatter here.
Yeah, the absolute size of the people does not rival Wisconsin.
Yeah.
But or Tennessee where I grew up. But no, the absolute size isn't there yet. But the percentage that are obese, because one of the issues is what we just talked about. They're adopting junk food. They're adopting McDonald's, but they're not adopting sports.
Yeah.
There's no sports programs in schools, and then you're teaching, you know, your income is dependent on people signing up for your school. How many people, you know, sign up versus, you know, you go to like Henzo's place in Manhattan. He's got like 1,000 paid members.
That is a good point, man. I can't tell you how many people I've had, local people in particular.
Yeah, local people
who show up and they try it out and they realize this is hard.
Yeah.
It's physically demanding. It makes me uncomfortable. It makes me sweat. I don't like this. I'm done.
Yeah, because I've done a lot of, because I'm an economist, and I do a lot of economics research for companies and stuff. And one of the common ones, they'll come to me and they, oh, you got a PhD in Wushu and you're an economist. Do us a paper on, we want to open a gym in Asia. And one of the things I always come up with is you open these gyms that you go, Shanghai has a population of, 25 million people. If 1% of them exercises and then 1% of that comes to my gym, I'll be a success. I'm like, yeah, but you know what? All these gyms that open up and you want to be all inclusive, you welcome everybody, and you wind up with generally mostly foreigners.
Yeah.
And there's only so many foreigners. That's the problem. There's only so many foreigners, and that's what you wind up with.
And that's did you hear about the UFC? They're opening a training center here in Shanghai. I don't know when or where in the city it's going to be.
Really? Like one
yes,
that people can join and pay money and train?
Well,
like
I'm not
that,
sure exactly
or one
what it
that's
is.
for training professional athletes?
For training professional
Okay.
athletes. They're opening the biggest UFC Performance Institute
Oh,
in the world here in
yeah.
Shanghai.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, how is that going to work?
Makes no sense to me.
Like, yeah, it makes zero sense to me either, especially considering like how, the state of affairs is. You go into, right now Shanghai, and it's come a long way since 10 years ago where there was nothing as far as MMA gyms go.
Yeah.
But you walk into any of the MMA gyms, my gym, Kyle's Animal Gym,
Well, you and Kyle have almost, okay, you're probably better informed than me, but you and Kyle have probably the only, or maybe there's 2 or 3 others that are like legitimate gyms, and they've got like a lot of members, and there's like regular classes going on. Because there's tons of MMA gyms in Shanghai, but they have like one student. They don't have any teachers. There's you and Kyle. I don't know if there's a couple more maybe.
Well, there's
not too many.
Alex Neal. He's got the Dragon MMA gym. He's
like I've been there. I've been to the Dragon MMA. Yeah.
And then there's Absolute MMA. It's an Australian
right.
chain.
That's
They
right.
opened up here.
Yeah.
But not too many.
But meanwhile, there's
most
actually
of them are brand new.
Yeah, but there's probably like 50 gyms in Shanghai. But
yeah.
But I'm saying like you guys are like legitimate gyms, and the classes actually happen every night. There's people at those classes.
Yeah.
There's instructors teaching those classes.
People who actually train to fight, who compete. Yeah.
I went to. I was going to do a story for Black Belt. I don't remember if I did it. I was going to do one for Black Belt Magazine about MMA in Shanghai, and I went to like all these gyms, and you won't believe how many MMA gyms I walked into. And I said, "Oh, is your grappling teacher a jiu-jitsu or a wrestling?" And they inevitably said, "We don't have a grappling teacher." I'm like, "Well, so how are you doing MMA?" "Well, we're just doing sanda." But
oh man,
yeah,
it is so hard to find wrestling coaches in China. We have the good fortune at my gym of having 2 outstanding wrestling coaches. One from Canada specializes in Greco-Roman. One from the U.S. specializes in freestyle. And man, it's so awesome to have them on board here. But
yeah, well, in the whole of China, in my book, I talked about this. So in the whole of China, the only wrestling teams are at the sports schools and at the sports university. And because China doesn't win gold in wrestling, it's not a priority of the government.
yeah,
Ping pong's a priority, badminton, certain things are priorities because they can do really well. Now that karate.
yeah.
You know how they recruited the karate team for the Olympics?
Oh, really? They're going to start that?
Oh, it already started. The last Olympics.
Oh, I did
there
not
was
know
already
that.
Karate. Yeah, and now Chinese government. So as soon as something becomes an Olympic sport, then Chinese government gets behind it, puts money into it. But you know how they built all the karate teams overnight was they took them from the sanda teams.
Ah.
So like my sanda coach just got a call. They're like, "We want you to learn karate," and like go, and like 3 months later he won a gold medal. They just taught him the rules basically, gave him a black belt, and then he just went and won the gold medal. Yeah, but other than these programs, there are no wrestlers in China. So there's only just over 1,000 wrestlers in the whole country.
Yeah,
just over 1,000.
That is so weird to think about.
And Chinese have not,
especially since they manufacture so many wrestling goods like wrestling shoes and whatnot. You can buy all that stuff.
But you can't buy it, and a lot of it you can't buy here, which is also hilarious. When I was at the sports university, I'd go home for Christmas. All the teachers, coaches come to me, "Hey, could you buy me this, buy me that?" And I'd buy it for them. And sure enough, it was made in China, but you had to buy it in New York. You couldn't buy it here.
Funny how that happens.
But the Chinese guys that tried to do MMA historically have not come from a wrestling background. They come from Sanda, which was logical because they had like 200 fights, put them in MMA, and they didn't do very well. There's a lot more Sanda fighters in China than there are wrestling. It's probably like 10,000. Probably like 10,000 because there's like 7,000 at Tago alone.
Yeah, and man, that's kind of weird to hear that number. Meaning, I've actually met a substantial percentage of the Sanda fighters in China, which is mind blowing considering how many people there are in this country.
Yeah, well, that's it. Because people who so this is another pet peeve that I have. Oh, you know what? On the internet, if you guys want to comment and attack me, please do. One of the things I hate is that people will analyze the U.S. and go, "Oh, the U.S. is not good at the Olympics." I go, "What are you, insane? The U.S. has won more than half the medals that have ever existed in the Olympics."
Yeah.
Like, yeah, but if we do this weird metric where we compare it to medals per capita of your population, like Barbados wins or something, and I'm like, that's madness. But China is my example of it doesn't matter what your population is; it matters what percentage of your population you're using. So,
right.
So China has, let's say, 4 times the population of the United States, but there's more wrestlers on Long Island. My home is Long Island. There's more wrestlers on Long Island than there are in the country of China.
Yeah, there were more wrestlers in my tiny little hometown in that tiny little high school than there are in Shanghai, man.
Yeah, well, in Shanghai, there are probably less than 100 because there's
probably
outside
of the
sports university.
Yeah.
Sports university. There's sports high schools. There's a couple of. There's more than one sports high school in Shanghai because different districts may have. It may be every district, but not every district has a wrestling team.
Yeah.
They have a sports high school, but it may not have a wrestling team. Yeah. So there might be like 100, maybe a bit more than 100. Might be more if you take everything: Greco-Roman, Chinese wrestling, and freestyle. Yeah, it may go over. Yeah, it's probably over 100, but yeah, it's not that many.
Yeah. Question about the Chinese folk wrestling. Where they wear that uniform.
Yeah.
Does that happen outside of sports universities?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so the traditional. That's kind of what I was saying at the beginning. So there's almost 2 tracks going on with that, like there is with the pushing hands in Taiwan.
Right.
So there's 2 tracks. So one is the real traditional track where like you train with a master under a tree in the park, and like Beijing's freaking awesome, man.
Yeah.
You go in the park on a Sunday. They've got a wrestling. They just like tamp down the grass or whatever, and they make a place to wrestle.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of old men, and they sit there all day, alternately drinking baijiu, white liquor, and tea.
Yeah.
And somebody has a jacket, a wrestling jacket, like because they don't even own their own jacket. Like somebody has a jacket, and they throw it out there.
Communal
and you put
jacket
on
that they share.
Yeah, it's this communal. Yeah, and you're watching, and I'll take the jacket next, and you put the jacket on, and you go in there and you wrestle. And that's the real traditional way.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
And the cool thing about that, this is one thing that I think we could learn in the West that I think could be adopted. So one of the things I get asked a lot after having been in Shaolin and all these things, is there anything we can learn from China? I'm like, no, we're doing fine. But no, there is one really cool thing. The Chinese wrestling is based on, the training is based on the Jibun Gong, which is the basic movements. There's about between 7 and maximum 17 basic movements that they learn, and they practice them over and over. And because it's China, and because it's based on that old like Wushu, doing forms and all that, it has this discipline of like, this is the movement, you do exactly this movement, you do it 800 times a day, and then when you wrestle, that movement comes through. Fa chulai, kan chulai. It's like you can see the movement coming through. And the old man in Beijing, for example, from the time they were little boys until now, they're old men. Every day they go in the park and they do their 7 or 17 movements hundreds of times. And maybe just once a week on Sundays, they wrestle with an opponent.
That is interesting.
I find that really interesting.
Man, just in the last few years, I've gained a whole new appreciation of forms in martial arts because that I didn't have before. And it's largely because of the way they were taught, especially in Taekwondo, because Taekwondo borrowed its forms from Shotokan, which borrowed its forms from something else, so nobody even remembers what they represent. Nobody knows how to teach them. They just teach them out of tradition. But if you have a form that means something and you know what it means and you realize this is shadow wrestling, these are the moves I will actually use in combat, these are combative moves, and I understand what they mean, that is brilliant.
Yeah, so if you look at like Wubu Chuan, which is like the first form you learn at Shaolin Temple, right? the meaning has really almost been lost.
Yeah.
Like my monk, when he taught me the form, he taught me what each of the movements, was for combatively, but they don't actually do it. So
Right.
the cool thing about Chinese wrestling is that there are these 7 or 17 movements. You learn these, and these are the actual movements that they do when they're sparring, when they're fighting. And that's like the coolest thing. And so one of the bad things is that the other track of learning Chinese wrestling through the sports school system and sport universities, that winds up becoming, the goal there is to win. The goal isn't really to learn Chinese wrestling, it's to win. So like on our team in the sport university, all the guys, including the coach, they were all people from the Greco-Roman
Right.
team.
So it wasn't about keeping the Kung Fu tradition alive, just winning
No.
the sport.
It was about winning, winning competition. And so you don't really learn the art. You don't appreciate the art as much. And then when you go to competition, these Greco guys, you just go out there, just pick the guy up and slam him, and that's a win, And but if you train with the old guys, and they usually train outdoors. That's an outdoor thing, and train with them. And there's like, I don't know, have you seen the tizi? It's like concrete. Sort of like kettlebells, like Chinese kettlebells.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So like we learned that. I don't know how to use kettlebells, but I know how to use tizi because
Okay.
you do them for wrestling. And there's a lot of things
Do you
like
swing them around like dynamically like a
yeah,
kettlebell?
and you
Okay.
practice your grips and you practice because they have like one of the competitions that we do and training exercises that we do. It's called changso, which is
Right.
gunfighter. So
Okay.
it's like your hands are at your sides, and then when they say go, it's who can grip first.
Oh.
Who can grip first, or who can grip and make the guy move first.
Yeah.
And you do that a lot with tizi, like with those things. Like you practice like. Oh yeah, I guess on the radio people can't see what I'm doing, but but yeah, like ripping, like holding these heavy weights and just ripping them to you.
It's okay because I know every one of my viewers watches this whole thing on YouTube because they love talking heads so much.
Yeah. And there's other ones. There's one that looks like a pole set in a concrete base, and there's like different throws and things that you do with that. So a lot of the things you do with the grappling that we do with grappling dummies, the Indians do with the clubs.
Oh, like that mace bell, club bell thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
I wrestled in India last year.
Really?
I don't know if I told you. Yeah, I went to India, and I'm going back in February to wrestle for money.
That's
but
an interesting wrestling culture.
Wrestled in India. Yeah, India has 250,000 wrestlers.
Wow.
250,000.
Wow.
No, I'm sorry. U.S. has 250,000. I'm sorry. India had 25 million.
Wow.
like 25
even
million.
more extreme.
Even more extreme. And India's won, in the history of India, they won something like 36 medals in Olympics across all sports. Like they're like the worst in the Olympics of any country.
Man, have you ever seen the Bollywood movie Sultan?
Yeah.
Oh man, it's for anybody who has not seen that movie, it's this Bollywood Indian film about this fictional wrestler. Well, he becomes a wrestler at like age 35, something like that.
Because he's in love with a girl.
Because he's in love with a girl who's an Olympic hopeful, and then within like 3 months he masters wrestling and wins the Olympics, and then goes on to become like world wrestling champion, then goes on to become a pro MMA fighter and beat Tyrone Woodley and all this, and then the Bollywood dance and song number breaks out in the middle of it, and it's a little obscene, but
the other one was much better. Dangal was so much better.
Yeah, that was the one based on the true story, right?
That's a true story.
Yeah,
Sort of.
That's a good Indian wrestling movie.
So my coach in India, is considered the only full-time journalist for wrestling in India. So he told me the real story of Dangal, which is really interesting. There was a girl that was an untouchable,
Yeah,
that wanted to be a wrestler, and he got behind her and he promoted her because he's a journalist and he knows everybody. So he promoted this girl, this untouchable, and she
they
wrestled
still
in
have
mud.
that caste system in
Yeah.
India, right?
And she
the
wrestled.
Brahmins all the way down to the untouchables.
Yeah, and she wrestled on mud. So in the movie, the two girls train on mud, but then they, Gita and Babita, they trained in mud, and then they won on mat. What actually happened in real life was they mixed the two stories together. The two girls depicted in the movie actually only trained on mat their whole lives. They never actually trained on mud. And this other girl trained on mud, and then they kind of put it together and made it. It was a really nice movie, though. It's very nice. But it's just a little shame because Babita and the girls they focus on in the movie, they are champions and they are famous. Now they become more famous because of the movie. Fortunately, this other girl's name has been kind of lost from the history,
man.
which is, but she's really important. And luckily, there's some like women's foundations that are, fighting to end the caste system and that sort of, they've gotten behind this girl and she's kind of become a spokesperson for that. So I think that's kind of cool.
That's super cool, man. Wrestling, changing the world, one life at a time. It's good for you, man. There's so many great life lessons to learn through wrestling. And yeah.
Well, that's another weird thing is that MMA. So I'm writing about this right now, but just that MMA, in the beginning, MMA was very quickly became jiu-jitsu plus Muay Thai. That was MMA in the early days. That's what everybody said. Oh, jiu-jitsu plus Muay Thai.
Oh yeah, when they saw John Lewis do it, the first Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt, who was also this expert level Muay Thai fighter who just knocked people out. Man,
and then
that was game changing.
But the interesting thing was from day one, once training actually started, which I don't believe people really trained for those first like 20 UFCs. Once training started, though, all the training, all of it, was based on wrestling, and the mentality was based on wrestling. It was based on the grind.
Yeah,
and I think that's really interesting that wrestling had such, even before wrestlers were winning in MMA, that wrestling, set the basis for MMA. I mean, that it had so much influence, and if you think that martial art went, judo went from Japan to Brazil, became Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which then, gets mixed with a bunch of other stuff, goes back to Japan, becomes this pro wrestling that winds up launching, MMA. Like it's just so insane, like this exchange that went on,
But wrestling, man, it is the art of position.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, winning fights is all about position. Position wins fights. Like even if you look at the mantra of jiu-jitsu guys like Pedro Sauer, he'll always repeat position and then attack.
Right. Position before submission.
And then attack. But that should be the case with every aspect of martial arts.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the case with boxing. You need the angles before you can throw the punch.
That's right. Judo, right? The setup, the unbalancing, and the execution.
Like
right?
everybody in theory understands this. Every martial art in theory teaches this, but wrestling does it the most pragmatically because that's all it is.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And you're engaged the whole time, which is very different. So I actually find it difficult sometimes when I go in. Like I was at Tiger Muay Thai recently, and we were doing stand-up grappling. Yeah. I actually find it difficult sometimes to wrestle jiu-jitsu guys because they don't always want to engage.
Yeah.
Like in wrestling, there's never a case where your opponent doesn't want to wrestle.
Oh, yeah. It's annoying, isn't it?
Yeah.
You want to clinch up, and they're just pushing out of the
keep
clinch.
Pushing
like,
get
away from me.
And I'm like, well, we have to do this because we have to get to the ground, and that's only going to happen if you engage with me, So that's kind of a really weird thing, and that's hard now. Like one of my wrestling teammates, I'm trying to get him some MMA fights now and things, and that's going to be a really hard thing because he's not going to understand that there's people who don't want to fight. Why did they get in the ring if they don't want to fight?
I know, right? I know. Did you see the Ultimate Fighter China edition?
I didn't.
Oh man, it's weird. It's super weird. So I don't know what Dana White was expecting when he signed off on that one, but they basically got like the leftovers of the Chinese MMA fighters who were not signed to RUF when RUF was still a thing, and filled in the gaps with like a yoga teacher who'd never even sparred before or trained anything.
I've seen that on YouTube. I've seen that.
You saw that one?
I saw him on YouTube. Yeah, I didn't know that was from that. Yeah,
that was from the Ultimate Fighter China, and Kung Lee was like the guest coach or something like
Yes,
that.
yeah.
And if this happened on the Ultimate Fighter in the U.S., they would have just laughed the guy to scorn and torn him up to pieces, literally or figuratively or whatever. But they're trying to coax the guy to get in the ring and spar, and he's just breaking down crying like, no, I don't want to. I feel bad about it. And the guys are patting him on the back like, it's okay, we understand. And they're so nice about it. They're so nice about it. I'm like, what? And it's like the opposite of what makes good reality TV in America. They're just like nice and compassionate and understanding. And I'm like, man, Chinese culture is so different,
it's so
man.
different. It's so different. Yeah, well, that's kind of the main point of my book, the Wrestlers Dissertation. I compared the development of Chinese wrestling and Western wrestling, and then, So now we are thousands of years into it, right? Because that's the other thing. Like, people claim China is the oldest society. Everything in China is not older than everything in the West. And lots of stuff in the West is very old, because we in the West, we do not count our birth of our culture in 1776. We don't count it in 1492. Yeah. We don't count it even with Greece and Rome. I mean, there's things that predate even Greece that we count as part of the development of, where did our numbers come from? Where did our writing system come from? Where did, we go all the way back to these kingdoms in the Middle East and Persia and, Babylonia, and because of that, Western wrestling is, the documented history is older even than Chinese wrestling. So now we're thousands of years on. What does Western wrestling look like? Oh, it became MMA and WWE, both of which are constantly evolving, constantly borrowing from other things. Constantly, you'll see a fighter invent a move today, and by next month, everyone's doing it. Yeah. Chinese wrestling is a bunch of guys doing the same 17 movements.
Yeah, it makes sense. But then you see those guys who invent the new stuff, and then you look back at like an ancient Greek statue, and you're like, oh, wait, that's that same move. Like, man, did I ever tell you about the time I thought I invented the quarter Nelson?
The day I thought I invented the quarter
Nelson. I independently figured it out, like, oh, if you put your hands like this, you have a lot of control over the guy's posture.
That was what was on my, right? Wasn't that the one that was on my Facebook
you
like a couple of weeks ago?
It
was almost the same thing. It wasn't a quarter.
It wasn't a quarter Nelson.
I don't know what it's called.
It was some type of, like a further Nelson or some variation of
And then later I realized it was a picture that I had on my computer. It was for a story I was doing about catch wrestling, and I just downloaded a random picture, and that was the picture.
But that's something that's so fascinating about wrestling, is every single culture under the sun throughout history has independently invented wrestling. Yeah. Like everyone. Like, man, I've been studying martial arts since I found out what martial arts are. And, anytime I find a book about it or whatever, I read up on it, and it's so cool to me. But, like, fistic, pugilistic martial arts are the rare exception. But grappling is the norm worldwide throughout history. It's so weird, but it's true.
Do you know, I make the argument that the most developed martial art that exists, the perfect martial art, the highest level of development of martial art, which martial art do you think I would pick?
Well, if we're going on Chinese names, isn't that what Tai Chi Chuan literally means? Like the ultimate... No, I'm not going to say that.
Yeah, please don't say that. Yeah.
Wrestling.
No.
Oh.
No.
Oh. Whoa. Well, you got me confused. Boxing, okay.
Western boxing. Okay. Why? Can you name 3 really good kickboxing arts?
3
really good, really effective kickboxing arts that,
Okay. Muay Thai.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's see here. Sanda.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, what's another one? I mean, there's so many.
But Holland.
Okay. Dutch kickboxing.
Dutch kickboxing, right? All good, right?
Okay, yeah.
And if they fight on a given day, this guy wins, and on a given day, the other guy wins.
Right.
And under this rule set, this one wins, that one wins, right? Different kinds of, even Kyokushin.
Sure.
Right? Right? Phenomenal kicking art, right? Savat, there's a bunch of them.
Yeah.
Name a hand fighting art.
A hand fighting art? You mean besides Wing Chun?
No, I'm talking about fighting here. Okay. I'm talking about martial arts. Don't change the subject. No, seriously. Other than boxing, on the planet Earth, there is no other hand fighting. There's nothing.
By hand fighting, you mean like punching?
Yeah, like where you're just allowed to punch. There's nothing that beats boxing. There is nothing. There are people that learn Muay Thai and then they go fight MMA. There's people who learn Sanda and go fight MMA. There's people who learn Dutch kickboxing. There's nowhere on this earth that someone is teaching a hand fighting punching art that people go, I better go learn that to improve my, my fighting or to improve my boxing. There is nothing. Boxing's perfect.
Oh man, it's amazing.
Western boxing, it's amazing.
It has so much in common with what I was saying about wrestling being the art of position, but it is the art of position for striking.
Yes.
And if you understand boxing, and you know a little bit about kicking, you can become a phenomenal kickboxer, in my opinion.
Yes.
However, if you are a phenomenal kicker and you do not understand boxing, or you know even just a little bit about it, you're never going to be a great kickboxer, not in my opinion.
So somebody told me that when he picks an MMA coach, he asks the coach, how many fights have you had? I said, I'll do you one better than that. I always ask the coach, how many fights did you have in the 70s? So when I started kickboxing, number one, we had to explain to people what that was. Nobody knew what we were talking about. I still remember my father's friend. He goes, "What's kickboxing?" I go, "Well, you know, it's like boxing, but you're allowed to kick." He's like, "You're not allowed to kick in boxing." Yeah, I know. That's why they call it kickboxing. It's cheating. But at that time, boxers would when kickboxing just started to pay money in the early 80s. In the 70s, kickboxing.
Boxers started dominating.
Boxers
they
dominated.
had to implement that silly rule. You have to throw a certain number of
That's
kicks
right.
above the
That's
belt.
right.
Just because they turned into boxing
You
matches.
had to throw 8 kicks. And I remember coaches sitting on the ring apron yelling, "You got your 8!" And then the guy would just go nuts. But boxers would go into taekwondo gyms, karate, because there weren't that many martial arts at that time, right? Like taekwondo was huge, karate always existed, and then me too. And I would go in those places, and these guys, and I would not throw a single kick, and I would win because boxing just dominated striking arts at that time. Later, as an adult, I went to Thailand, and I found out that. Yeah, it's a little different when they're allowed to kick you with their shin bones.
Another thing that's unique with boxing and Muay Thai and those cultures that separates them from martial arts, traditional martial arts, and I think everybody knows this on a cerebral level, is that boxers know how to fight.
Yes.
Not all karate guys know how to fight.
That's right. That's right.
Right. Not all traditional martial artists even know what a fight is.
That's right. And if you go to Thailand or Cambodia, there's no such thing as amateur Muay Thai or amateur Khmer boxing, because the only reason you would do it is because you're going to fight for money. And first of all, the only reason you do it is because you're going to fight. So there aren't guys in the gym training going, "Are you going to fight?" And it's like, well, no, you wouldn't be if you're not going to, and you would only fight for money. So I mean, yeah, you're right. It's a fighting mentality from day one, you know. And nobody did boxing until probably after UFC. And then he started having like cardio Muay Thai and cardio boxing. Until that time, probably nobody did boxing who wasn't planning to fight.
Yeah, man, they were. It's kind of shocking how few boxers there were, or guys training with boxers there were in the early UFC. I think Randy Couture is one of the notable ones because he did boxing in the military. But
I read his book though. Do you know he didn't even mention that?
Yeah,
I know they always said that in the commentary. Oh yeah, he boxed in the military. I read his book, and if he did any boxing in the military, it must have been very little. He did serious. I mean, he was the because there's like a military Olympics where all the armies in the world compete.
Oh yeah,
and he won the wrestling in that. Like he was already a world champion, like a military grade world champion.
Makes sense.
Yeah, because he was on the post wrestling team, and then he was on the like the all army team and all that. He was a phenomenal wrestler, but yeah, he didn't even mention his boxing.
Yeah, I just remember reading a few interviews where he mentioned he boxed a bit in the military or something like that, so he had some understanding about boxing that his opponents didn't, and he was able to see like angles that they weren't seeing. Capitalize on those things. But it's weird. You watch his fights, and most of them you're not seeing boxing. You're seeing wrestling for mixed martial arts. But the way he described those fights was different. Like he described them from because of this boxing experience, I was able to do this wrestling
to get the position.
thing. Basically.
Like a really interesting point about Randy Couture. So as a Greco-Roman wrestler, you have to be able to clasp your hands around your opponent.
Yeah. And
he couldn't do that with Brock Lesnar because of the physical dimensions of Brock Lesnar.
Oh yeah.
That's why he lost against Brock Lesnar. Like, I don't know if people understand the exact reason, but that is the exact reason that he lost against Brock Lesnar, is because he could not reach his arms all the way around and clasp his hands.
Oh man, technique is not a one-size-fits-all thing.
No.
I think this is one of the big failings in the way jiu-jitsu is advertised, because it's generally taught as it doesn't matter how big or strong the guy is, you can beat him. And man, it's totally not true. Especially like if you look at 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu, I love Eddie Bravo. I love what he's contributed to the sport of mixed martial arts. And I used to be all about the rubber guard. Back in the day, I bought Eddie Bravo's book and I won some fights using those techniques. And I was sold. I was like, wow, this works. This is amazing. This is great. But the thing is, if you're fighting somebody too physically large to wrap your legs around, rubber guard is impossible.
That's right.
So it works up until a certain threshold. Like if the guy's 30% bigger and stronger than you, they'll shut that down quick.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, like so in Asia, you know, the weight division's usually pretty screwed up. So like 89 and over is usually just like an open weight, which is one of the reasons why I've never cut weight. You know, I generally weigh like 92 kgs, and I'm going to fight the same guy no matter what happens. So I might as well just stay 92 kgs. So I've had opponents that were like 120, 130, because it winds up being the open weight. You know, so I'm fighting this guy 130. So I'm going into that fight, and I'm talking with my coach about strategy. And so one of the guys goes, well, I go, yeah, you know, I want to take it to the ground, but I have to be on top. Guy's 130 kgs. I absolutely, positively have to be on top.
And just by weight, you could have to tap out to the weight if he gets on top of you, man.
He may not know anything, and he could beat you just by laying on you and hitting you with the elbow. Can you imagine elbows in the face? You know.
The first time I tapped out to fatness in training, man, I had this dude who weighed like 450 pounds, something like that. He just leaned on me. No technique, just nothing. Just leaned his weight on me, and my ribs cracked in training, and I had to tap out. I was like, what the heck?
Well, the first non-Japanese to ever win the Judo World Championship was a guy named Giesnick, who was a giant. I forgot what his size was, but he was a giant. He was like one of the biggest people who ever competed. And, you know, and I don't want to take anything away from his technique because he was very gifted. You at that level, you have to have technique, otherwise you can't win. So, I mean, he definitely had the technique. But, yeah, he was just ridiculously huge. But yeah, it does bother me when people... this mantra of, oh, it doesn't matter, bigger and stronger. Like, it absolutely matters. And strength will compensate for some skill will compensate for strength.
Yeah, man. If you're fighting gorillas, you need a better weapon, quite frankly. So speaking of tough guys, let's go back to Shaolin.
Shaolin Temple. Yeah, sorry about that.
No, it's
so
good. So
people are going to think it was false advertising. I thought they were going to talk about the Shaolin Temple.
I know. I'm on the title of this podcast, I'm going to write, Antonio talks all about the Shaolin Temple.
3 hours of Shaolin.
So I get so many questions from people asking. So these Shaolin monks, like in the Western mind, in America, we see them. We see these movies. We see these demos where they look like they're indestructible, magical people filled with chi energy that makes them invincible. And one of the most common questions is, are they really like that? If you took a Shaolin monk, one of these guys who's able to do these amazing demonstrations, feats of physical strength and skill or whatever, and put him in an MMA fight today.
He'd get killed.
Okay.
He would get killed, like instantly.
Yeah.
You can't, okay, I did Martial Arts Odyssey. You know, I've been doing this for years, and I've trained with old men up on mountains, and I've trained in, you know, in paddy fields, and I've trained, you know, and there is nothing out there. I will say it right now publicly. There is nothing else out there. There is no special. There is no magic. There is no guy in a cave with 3 students who can beat everybody in the world because they know the secret. There is no secret. The secret is you get up early in the morning, you run, then you lift weights, then you wrestle, then you work the pads, you know, and then you spar, and you get a jiu-jitsu guy to come in and, you know. That's the secret.
Oh, man, you just told all those kids on the internet that Santa Claus isn't real.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I know. You don't know how much I came under attack. When my first book, The Monk from Brooklyn, right? I totally ripped the Shaolin Temple apart, right? And a lot of people hated me, and they were saying awful things about me. And I would always respond and go, oh, well, how long did you live there?
Yeah.
How many of those guys did you fight? I mean, we sparred all the time. Those guys couldn't fight. How the hell are they going to fight? They're not fighting. How are they going to fight?
Yeah.
You know? And who are they fighting with? They live on a mountain in freaking Henan province. Randy Couture's never been there. Yeah. You know, Rico Rodriguez never went there.
They've probably never seen the UFC or even know what mixed martial arts is.
They didn't know back then. They didn't know what it was even. You know, when I went back in 2013, they did, and they asked me if I could help them start an MMA program up there. They wanted to start having like MMA camp at the Shaolin Temple, and the problem is the money, the cost.
Yeah.
They go, what's the best place in the world for MMA camp? I go, Tiger Muay Thai. They go, how much is it? I go, all inclusive is something like $1,000 a month for like full-time training, the best training in the world, and lodging. I think maybe that's not food. Maybe it's like lodging and training. It's like $1,000 a month. Yeah. Shaolin, they wanted $1,000 a month now just to go up there and live in like horrible, deplorable conditions and train, you know, kung fu. And then if they're going to do MMA, they got to bring in, you know, Western trainers, and they're going to have to pay the money, and you know.
That's going to look really weird to, you know, say an American who has this idea, like, I'm going to go train with the monks and gain magic powers, and then they go over there and there's like a white guy teaching them how to wrestle and box. They're like, wait, this isn't what I signed up for.
Both times I was up there, they had me teaching boxing. The second time, though, it was like relatively official. They're like,
wow.
I actually had a time slot every night at 8:30, and I taught boxing.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah. So now it's changed. It's definitely changed. Like, to their credit, my experience in 2013 was so much better in a way than my one in 2003 because they just understood the world so much more. First of all, every kid in Shaolin had a smartphone.
Oh, wow.
And they have Wi-Fi.
Interesting.
One of the funny things when I was at Shaolin in 2013 was they would have their training, and then before the monk would dismiss them, he would give them homework assignments. And their homework assignment was to go online, find a particular form, and like learn it like from their phone, and then come in tomorrow and like be trained on it. So that was really cool.
So all these kid monks up at the Shaolin Temple, did they have like WeChat accounts or Douyin or anything? Any of those Chinese social media where they can actually post videos of the training? Or
they all have WeChat, and they all had WeChat, and they were on Youku, and they would find their video lessons, and they would train with their video stuff as well as their physical. So that was cool. And when I lived there in 2003, almost nobody spoke Mandarin. Or I won't say almost nobody. I would just say that there was definitely like a Shaolin Hua, like they had their own language. And because the students were from all over, and they all spoke different dialects, and they just wind up with like this Shaolin language. The same way the U.S. Army has a Southern accent, it's the same kind of thing.
That explains so much. Hold on, I'm going to turn the contrast up a little on this video. Keep going.
But when I went back in 2013, everybody spoke Mandarin, and they knew what the UFC was. They were asking me to help start MMA. So it was a very different world when I went back 2013. 2003, though, it was like I was the only foreigner. I was the only foreigner they'd ever seen. I slept in the temple. To my knowledge, and I don't know how true this is, I was the only foreigner who slept in the temple.
Yeah, that's.
And my book came out a few months before Matthew Polly's book came out. Matthew Polly wrote American Shaolin.
Well, so you actually stayed inside the temple. I remember watching. There's a popular YouTube video about this guy. This guy went over and trained at Shaolin, but he specifically noted they didn't let like outsiders in there.
Yeah, 2013
like
when I went back would have been
for
impossible.
The Westerners.
Yeah, 2013 when I went back would have been impossible. 2003 everything was so kind of loose. They did. First of all, 2003 it was not a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Wow. So when I got to Shaolin Temple, like I flew to Henan. I got the only taxi in Henan that was like licensed to take foreigners. I paid him money. He drove me from the airport in Zhengzhou to Shaolin Temple.
Yeah.
We got to the gate of Shaolin, and I knocked on it was like quite Shanghai. It was at night. The gate was locked. Yeah. And I like knocked on the gate till a monk in robes came and opened it, and I'm like, I want to like.
It's got to be surreal.
It was insane. It was that part of my experience was exactly like the movie. It was like exactly like the. If you've ever seen the original pilot episode of Kung Fu, the TV show.
Kung Fu, yeah.
That's what it was.
David Carradine. Wow.
Yeah. So I slept in the temple for a bunch of nights, and then the monks. They came to me and they go, "Oh, do you like it here?" I go, "Oh yeah, I really like it here." And they're like, "Oh, you want to train?" "Yeah, okay. Well, give us." They wanted some insane amount of money. In 2003, China was poor.
So you're saying that the Shaolin Temple is a for-profit organization?
Yeah, the monks are for profit. And so I didn't want to pay them that amount of money. They wanted some crazy amount of money, and I was like, "No, I'm not going to pay you that." They go, "Well, how much do you want to pay?" I said $200 a month. And at that time, the average income in China was probably like $600 a year or something. Like $200 a month is a lot of money, and I was willing to pay $200. He goes, "Okay, I'll see if I can find you a discount monk."
A discount monk?
They found me a discount monk. So I went and lived with a discount monk, but then I slept outside the gate.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's always astounded me how like so many people in China and just like just assume that Americans have like way more money than we generally have.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you go on the street to haggle for something like a T-shirt or whatever, they're like, "We want $500 for this." "It's a T-shirt. Are you kidding me?" "I'll give you a special discount price, $499.
Well, what I told the guy in 2013 when he was asking me about starting the MMA program there, and of course my Chinese language skill is much higher 2013. But I said to him, I said, look, I said, you have to understand, we pay more for things because the quality is infinitely better. I go, this accommodation that you got me living in, 2013 was so much better. 2003, there were 60 people living in one house. There were no showers, and there was one outhouse, a one-hole outhouse out back. And there were 60 people, right? When I lived there in 2013, we were like, foreigners lived like 2 or 3 to a room. Chinese kids lived like 6 to a room. And there were 2 showers and 2 toilets, Western toilets, like in the building. You know, it was very different. We had Wi-Fi, we had air conditioning.
That's a massive difference.
Very different. Very different experience. But even that, I said to him, I go, look, this isn't worth $1,000. This is worth $1,000 because it's the Shaolin Temple and it's a cool experience, but it's not actually worth this.
Yeah.
You know? And then I told him Tiger Muay Thai, what they were charging. He's like, well, we could never compete with that price. I'm like, yeah, or their quality. I mean, they got, you know, teachers from all over the world, and, you know. So that's a big thing that I was trying to educate people on here. I'm like, yes, we pay more for stuff in America, but then we're very demanding about the quality.
Yeah.
You know.
Indeed. Indeed. Man. So, now we mentioned that if one of these monks, one of these Shaolin monks fought in the UFC, he'd just get killed right away, right? How good are they actually at hand-to-hand combat?
Zero.
Zero.
Come on, man. They're not doing any fighting. How are they going to fight? They're really good at performance forms, and there is almost no connection between performance forms and fighting, except that I think it's a really good base. Like I said, like my friends that learned that as children were so much better as Sanda fighters or wrestlers. A few of the wrestlers came out of that background, which was really cool too.
Right.
They're so much more flexible.
Yeah, if you know how to move, if you're more athletic, you'll be better at learning how to fight.
Yeah.
But you have to learn how to fight.
But you have to learn how to fight. And you probably have to learn before you're too old. Like, I don't think that you could take, because like at the sports university, one of my friends that was a Wushu major, he's already at the sports university. So I mean, he's already like in his 20s. He's been doing this his whole life. He wants to be a fighter. And I'm telling him, his name was Mars. I'm like, Mars, there's no way you're going to be a fighter. You can't do it. I go, can you hold a man down and hit him in the face with your elbow till he bleeds enough that they stop the fight? You know, and also Mars happened to weigh like 80 kgs. I go, Mars, you're going to be fighting guys that look like me. You have no muscle tone. Like, you know, but anyway, no, they couldn't fight. And then they do those demos at Shaolin. They do a lot of stuff where they break things, you know, with their hand. But we know this has nothing to do with fighting. Yeah. The Dog Brothers, those 2 guys, they are like, I've seen them in interviews actually say that. They're like, look, my brother and I are arguably the best people in the world at breaking stuff with our hands and our faces and whatever he goes, but it doesn't translate to fighting. I've actually heard them say stuff like that.
Oh, man, it's absolutely true. Man, before I did any professional fights, way before that, I did Taekwondo board and brick breaking demos all the time. I could smash stacks of bricks. Not the fake kind, you know, the real kind. Construction grade bricks with my elbows and my palms and forearms and stuff. And, you know, those demos were cool. And it's very empowering psychologically to be able to break a stack of bricks. But then to go from that to fighting a guy who knows how to box a little bit, not even a lot, just a little bit, and you can't touch him, man, that is such a humbling experience. To realize all that power, all that breaking power means nothing without the position.
When I think back to the 70s and 80s, all the fights that I had, and the number of those fights that I won just on pure boxing, just on knowing how to box, and you could beat essentially almost any martial artist, unless they caught you. Like Taekwondo has that spinning back kick that's like one of their best things. Yeah. He's running backwards, and then he does the spinning back kick and hits you in the abdomen. Like, unless he gets that, maybe a head kick knockout, but that's it. If they didn't get that, like, they lost. And they also didn't train the way we did. They didn't do rounds. They didn't do 3-minute rounds. They weren't running every day. They weren't lifting weights. They weren't doing all the other things that fighters do. And so I look at that, and then I go from there to Shaolin Temple, and I'm like, it's the same thing. It's these guys are on this mountain doing this martial arts stuff that's got nothing to do with anything. And sometimes they would tell us, like, oh, we want you to run up and down the mountain. And I'm like, why? Why? Are you fighting? Are you training for a fight? Like, what are you going to do with this cardio that you're allegedly building by running up and down the mountain? You're going to go do a demo? You're going to break a brick?
Oh, man. That's a good point, man. Because it feels good to run up and down a mountain.
I feel like I'm pooping on Santa Claus. I'm sorry. Can I say that? I'm sorry. I feel like I'm pooping on somebody's dreams here.
You are pooping on a lot of people's dreams right now. Man, anytime on my YouTube channel when I point out the reality of fighting, people get mad.
Yeah.
I mean, they get mad. Fighting is, I mean, it's nasty, it's brutish, it's hard. Not everybody can do it. Not just physically, but psychologically. Like you mentioned, that question you asked that kid, can you hold a man down and drop elbows on his face until he's done? And there is that huge physical aspect. Are you physically able to do it? But psychologically, can you pull the trigger? Can you put yourself in a dark enough place where it doesn't matter if you mess that guy up?
Or it doesn't matter how hard you get hit.
Yeah,
that's why I feel grateful that my first martial art really was boxing, and that I took so many beatings because I wasn't gifted, athletically, and I'm small, and and I've been in the heavyweight division since I was 20, and for the folks at home, I'm only 5'7", so I'm the shortest guy in the heavyweight division, right? And growing up, I took so many beatings, and it just taught you times where I'm just like leaking blood and your eye is swollen shut. But you know what? You're not knocked out, so you don't quit, and you keep fighting, and you wind up winning the fight.
The lights are still on, so you keep going.
You just keep going, And when you watch, this is another one, because I'm watching Fight Pass so much, but how many fights where the referee steps in to stop the fight because the guy is essentially knocked out, and he immediately grabs the ankle of the opponent. Like it's that will, like that fighter's completely unconscious. He's still fighting.
The muscle memory's still going on autopilot.
And you don't have that when you're on the mountain up in Henan breaking bricks with your fist, or doing demos with your willing students and knocking them down. You don't have that. And that's another one I ask people, because people challenge me all the time, because of the TV show or because of whatever, and then they want to challenge me. And unlike other martial artists that say, listen, I'm not going to fight somebody who's not trained. My feeling is if he thinks he can win, it's a fair fight. I'll fight those guys. But I always ask them that. I always go, because they always want to tell you, I won 50 fights. I'm so tough. I won all these street fights. I go, okay, let me ask you a question. Have you ever had both eyes swollen shut and a broken rib? And you won the fight? Have you had that? Have you gone into a fight knowing that your opponent had better skill than you? How many times? Because you're a fighter. You've had every combination. You've had this. My opponent is bigger and stronger and scarier looking than me, but I think I have better skill than he does. My opponent has better skill than I do, but I believe I have better cardio. My opponent has every possible advantage, but I'm still going in. Right?
Right.
Or I 3 days before the fight, ripped a tendon in my knee. Wow, I'm going to have to win this fight on boxing. Not, I'm going to pull out. I have a legitimate reason to pull. No, I have to win this fight on boxing because my knee is torqued up.
Oh, man.
And you only have that if you've been a fighter or a wrestler,
Indeed. Man, I think every fighter out there, every real fighter out there has a story to tell about the situation they went into that fight with, whether they won or they lost. I had this injury or that injury. And a lot of people say, stop giving excuses. But they're not excuses. It's just the narrative behind what happened. Because, fighters fight regardless of the circumstance.
That's right.
I banged up my heel before the fight, but I went in anyway. I cut 30 pounds for this fight, but I went in anyway.
So, there's one thing. So on the one hand, I support them because I absolutely believe him, right? Because that's real. The flip side is we've all been there. And it's very rare. Probably if you think back on all your fights, how many of them were you actually 100%?
Zero.
Yeah. So that's the only thing. When a guy uses that as an excuse, I had a broken rib, but I took the fight anyway. You know what? I commend you, and I believe you.
You got to ask, what was the other guy going through?
Yeah, and what were you in your last fight that you won? You probably also had a broken something, But I've definitely walked in where I couldn't straighten either of my arms. I'd had too many submissions and I couldn't straighten either arm, and you go in the fight and you just do it. But boxing, I think boxing taught me the most, though, to just take, because you get hit more in boxing than in any other sport. You take more shots. So boxing
is so true.
Boxing just teaches you, I had when I trained for my first pro MMA fight, one of the things they had me do was they had me spinning. You spin around in a circle and you stare at your finger. Have you ever done this? So they do
Staring at the finger.
You stare at your finger and you spin in a circle.
Okay. I've done the spinning thing, but not while looking
Yeah,
at the
if you
finger.
stare at your finger, it makes you even more dizzy.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm going to try that
Yeah.
in my next training session.
Okay, and straight away, that's something that I want to say about MMA training, and it comes from wrestling. I just told you a better way to make yourself tired, and you said, oh, that's good, I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
We're always looking for a better way to make ourselves tired.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
So you do this thing, you spin, right? And they had me do it for up to like a minute, like it spin, right?
Yeah.
And then hit pads.
Yeah.
And the idea is that it simulates if you've been hit in the head. And, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I go into a fight, and I think it was my third professional fight. My opponent was a karate master, champion, whatever. Bell rings, and Anderson Silva had just had that big. So you know what happened. This guy up kicks me. No. He just
the up kick knockout.
The up kick knockout, right?
Tore bell for it.
Yeah. So the bell rings. I come out. The guy up kicks me under the jaw. Just by the grace of God, like literally, had it been 1 centimeter in either direction, I'd probably be dead, right?
Yeah.
But somehow it didn't kill me, but it knocked me out.
Right.
And I was unconscious. And because of that drill, I drove forward, I grabbed the guy, and I just hugged him. And a lot of that came from boxing, because when I used to box, I used to get temporary knockout, which today now we know is not good for you.
Yeah.
But back then, you get temporary knockout, you just grab and you just hold on. And there's fights where like the referee is like forcibly trying to pry us apart, but my head wasn't clear, so I wouldn't let go. But it was like that. So I drove forward. I just grabbed the guy as tight as I could. I held on, and I started coming awake a little bit, and I tripped him down, and I landed on top of him, and I did not become fully awake until I had him on the ground, pinned inside control.
Yeah.
But it was because of that drill. If it hadn't been for that drill, or maybe because of the boxing experience.
Oh, man, that's awesome.
Yeah, but that's the kind of thing that if you're not fighting, you're not training, you wouldn't have that.
That state of being knocked out standing, that's something I don't think you can really understand unless you've experienced it. But,
It's like that horrible dream. And I've been there, and I've lost fights where you're in that horrible dream. I lost a horrible fight in North Carolina 25, 30 years ago, and I still remember the fight. It was like that dream where you're throwing punches with everything you got, but they're going through the air like slow. And the guy is just like, ba-da-ba-ba, ba-da-ba-ba, and he's hitting you like 10, 20, to the point that you stop throwing punches. You're like, there's no point in me throwing more punches. And I lost. It was like, I don't even know what they call it. The referee just stopped the fight. He just goes, look, you're not doing anything.
Technical knockout, yeah.
Yeah. It goes down in the books as a TKO, but I mean, it was basically that I just wasn't doing anything.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
So I got a question from a subscriber a while back, since you mentioned being a shorter guy fighting as a heavyweight in boxing. And he's a boxer. He's 125 pounds, if I remember his question correctly, and everybody keeps telling him that he needs to go down to 115 because they're saying you're too tall, or your height is good for 115. And I'm thinking like I have some experiences with extreme weight cutting, and
what weight did you fight at?
I fought in 4 different weight classes. Now when I started fighting, there were the kickboxing organization I was fighting in, day of weigh-ins. So I fought generally as a welterweight. I was walking around like 160 pounds.
Okay.
And I showed up to fight at 170.
Okay.
And because nobody was cutting weight, or if they did, it was like 1 or 2 pounds just so they could make the threshold, and they'd drink a Gatorade or whatever to rehydrate right before the fight. Then when I started fighting in MMA, I started fighting at a 155.
Okay.
Because I realized, oh, wait, I can just step in the sauna for 5 minutes and cut that 5 pounds, and it's not really going to affect me. No big deal. But then when I came out here to China, everybody started asking me to. I ended up doing a couple of fights in the same week at 145. So I was walking around like 176 pounds, and in less than 24 hours, I had to cut 30 pounds. Now I kind of got what's the word I'm looking for? Bamboozled into believing it was a catchweight match. This was my martial combat fight down in Singapore. I fought Leandro Issa.
Did he who will not be mentioned?
Yes, he who shall not be
named. He
named.
arranged that fight for you?
Yes, our old buddy Voldemort arranged that
Yeah,
match,
that's the
telling me
kind
it
of
was a
thing.
catchweight match.
Yeah, he comes to me. He's like, "You're 135 pounds, right?" Yeah, I just signed you to fight at 135.
Oh man, did that happen?
No, I'm exaggerating.
I would believe it if
For
you
the
told
folks
me.
at home, I weigh 92 kgs.
Anyway, so this dude I was working with at the time, we keep calling he who shall not be named. Because if we name him, he might get mad. Anyway, sorry about that. So he finds out about this fight in Singapore with Leandro Issa, world Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt champion, awesome grappler.
Oh my God.
I didn't get that information. Just, he's a guy with a similar record to you, which on paper he did, as far as professional MMA fights, wins and losses. So I fly down to Singapore, and I find out from the promoter, this is not a catchweight match at 165 pounds. You don't have to cut 10 pounds. You have to cut 30. And you have less than 24 hours before the weigh-in. Good luck.
What exactly is like I've
A
never had a
catchweight.
cut
Okay, yeah.
weight, so I don't know.
Catchweight, for anyone
catchweight?
who's not familiar, it's when there is an agreed upon weight outside of the standard weight classes. So, for example, and I did a few catchweight matches before. Like I fought this dude named Brian Perrin at a catchweight of 165. He was a little heavier. I was a little lighter, so he went down. I went up.
But there is no 165 weight class?
In MMA, no. I think.
It was in MMA.
They're making some new weight classes right now, but back then, no.
But everywhere I fought in Asia, it was you had to be within the span.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's everywhere I've ever fought. Like if it's 65 to 70, you could be anywhere in 65 to 70.
Yeah, example. And occasionally, if the fighters agree and the promoter agrees, occasionally there's a catchweight match, and that's what I believed it was.
So catchweight would be like they would say you have to be 67.
Yeah, so
as long
as both fighters,
you have to be 67.
Yeah, like there's a weight disparity. Yeah,
I see.
So I believed because this guy was very convincing. It was going to be a fight at 165 pounds. So I flew down to Singapore, and they tell me essentially, you don't have a return flight home unless you make weight and show for this fight at 145 pounds. So I'm like, okay, better get to work. So I go up to the hotel sauna. It's broken. So I go to the hotel gym. I put on every article of clothing I brought with me, and got on the treadmill, and I jogged. I basically ran a marathon, got on the elliptical, ran another one, got on the stationary bike when I was too weak and tired to do any more, pedaled the equivalent of a marathon on a bike right there, and I lost like 10 pounds of water weight, just sweat. And I'm like, oh man, 20 more to go. How am I going to do this? Eventually the sauna got fixed, and I stepped in there, blacked out a bunch of times. And it is a miracle I didn't die. Here's something. This is the first time I ever cut any significant amount of weight for a fight. Anything more than like 3, 4, 5 pounds. Almost every fighter who has cut that percentage of their body weight, I think it was 18%, 17.5%, 18% of my body weight, almost every fighter who has attempted that since, without close medical supervision, has died.
Yeah, right.
There was a guy in Singapore last year.
I was about to say, yeah, specifically Singapore. That's where the guy died last year.
Man. So I went out for this fight, and I'm just feeling dead. The room's spinning. My arms and legs aren't responding because I'm just depleted completely of electrolytes, and no way I could rehydrate in the given time. And fighting one of the best grapplers on that side of the world at the time, and man, it did not go well.
Yeah.
And man. So weight cutting. How did we get onto that story? I got distracted a little easily.
But for me, I've once when I was boxing, I had to cut weight because my coach signed me to a fight. One time I had a really old coach that was absent-minded, and he really did. He signed me to a fight at like 165 pounds, and I was walking around at 200 pounds.
Wow.
And I tried to cut, and I didn't make the cut, but it was a really big tournament. So when I was weighing in, they go, well, you didn't make, whatever I cut to, like 174 or something, and then they go, but we have a guy at 174 that needs an opponent. So, and then that was the fight that I told you where I was just throwing everything in slow motion. I mean, it was just too much of a weight cut.
Man, it dramatically affects your performance, even cutting a little bit, and a lot, man.
So here in Asia, though, like I've only cut weight a few times, and it's just that I walk around at like 92. There's been a few times that they told me if I fought at 89, that I could be with the smaller, like 85 to 89 or 80 to 89. And so if I cut a couple of kilos, it would benefit me. that actually only worked out once or twice. Like in wrestling it did, but in MMA it generally doesn't, because then you show up and they're like, oh, the only guy we got is 120 kgs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when I fought, the biggest opponent I ever fought, I was 82. I didn't cut, but I just was 82 when I walked in. And yeah.
And what's crazy about that Singapore fight is 2 days later I flew out to Xi'an and fought at middleweight. So I went from 145 up to 185
plus
in 2 days.
Plus you took a beating.
I had my rotator cuff torn in my left shoulder. The guy caught me with the Kimura and twisted it, and I didn't tap out soon enough. And man, so I didn't feel normal again for months afterward.
Well, I mean, like my first, my second pro MMA fight, I got knocked out, and he kicked me in the head. He was a judo champion, and we had trained for me to fight a judo guy. And next thing I know, he starts throwing kicks. And
you don't expect
froze.
that from a judo guy.
Yeah, I froze. Like, had it happened to me like 6 months later, I would have been fine with it. But I was so new to MMA, and I froze. I didn't know what to do. And he wound up kicking me in the head and knocking me unconscious. But because of all that drilling we'd done, I charged him.
Yeah.
Even though I was unconscious, I charged him. But, man, he stepped back, and he was humongous. He was like 115 kg, I believe. And a judo master, and he smashed me with his forearm in the center of my face, like a gorilla. Like, because he really had no real striking training, but he was just really powerful because he's a judo guy. And he smashed me right between the eyes with that thing, and I just fell on my back, and I was out. And when I woke up, the referee was separating us from a submission.
Oh, wow.
Because, I'd gone down and he went on top of me. So it went in the books as a submission rather than a TKO. But my arm got really, seriously torqued, because I was unconscious, so I didn't tap.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it took 6 months to recover. But I fought every month for the next 6 months. So, I mean, that's the thing. Like, these guys that are telling me that they can fight but they don't fight, I'm like, you're full of crap. And I'm just so sorry, but you are, And it's so easy you could say anything, right? But to actually do it,
man, it's a whole different thing, physically, mentally, and every other way. Oh, I remembered what got me onto the subject. That dude, this boxer, he weighs 125 pounds.
Oh yeah.
His coaches want him to cut down to 115, which I'm
so against weight cutting. Just don't do it. Just
it's a
freaking
pernicious
fight.
evil.
You're the same guy. Just go in there and fight. I mean, what the hell? I don't understand this weight cutting thing. Just fight.
Yeah, my advice, if you're really close to the cutoff weight, like if you're 2 pounds over, sure, okay, sweat that off and you'll be fine. But if you're cutting anything that's going to significantly affect your performance, man, just don't. Well,
Joe Rogan, I mean, and I totally agree with this. I mean, Joe Rogan's talking about, number one is that he really admires the 1FC's a weight cutting policy now, and in the U.S. in high school wrestling now they have random weight checks, just like they have random drug techs. Show up at the school and just weigh the kid in the middle of the day because they want to make sure that you're not cutting more than X amount of weight when you fight.
And I have a friend back in the U.S. who wrestled, and he was so obsessed with making that weight every time for every competition, and they do it so often. That he got to the point where he couldn't make the weight. He sweat it all out. He literally started cutting himself to cut weight, to bleed it out.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
And at that point, he saw himself like bleeding out in the shower while he was doing it. He just had this epiphany, like, what the heck am I doing? I have to stop. I need an intervention. This is a problem.
I always wonder about people who use their kids' college fund or communion money to buy cocaine. Like, at that moment, do you just not say to yourself, like, wow, I wonder if this is... what if this has gone too far now? I mean, like when I lost my job in my house, like that's normal. But this...
Oh, man.
Or like those girls, it's usually girls, but also guys, when they like die of anorexia, and they like, they're in bed, they can't support their body weight, and then they're refusing to eat because they're too fat. Like, at what point do you just go, oh, maybe I'm not? Like, has anyone tried that line of reasoning? Like,
I don't know, man. I don't know. At what point does it become shocking to you?
Yeah, like you can't walk. That should be a pretty good indicator.
It's weird because
you're not too fat.
As humans, we're really good at developing these tolerances to gradual changes over time.
Yeah, true.
And so if we gradually indoctrinate ourselves in these crazy ideas, they become more acceptable. If we gradually expose ourselves to certain stresses, they become more tolerable. But man, I don't know.
I don't know, man. But I know a lot of guys that as adults, their metabolism was just ruined from high school wrestling. And a lot of them, like you said, there are a lot of guys that after high school, they never do any sports again. There's guys after college, they never do any sports again. And the wrestling guys, a lot of them, the rest of their life, they were either too skinny, like, because that's weird too, right? When you're just like too skinny and you're an adult male and you weigh like 125 pounds or something. It's like, dude, you know, yeah. And then some of them were fat.
I was one of those guys. I actually weighed 98 pounds when I finished high school.
Are you serious?
At a height of 6'1". I kid you not.
That's insanity.
I was like a walking skeleton.
That is horrible.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's no good either, you know. Yeah, but I've known guys that ruin their metabolism from wrestling. And the thing is that at the end of the day, who cares what you're like? The lessons you need to learn from sports, right? You need to learn like dedication, discipline, showing up every day in training, doing it for the team, right? Sometimes you don't want to do it, but it's not just you, and you have to remember that. And that helps you later when you're a father. You're a father now. There's probably days you don't feel like doing it. You know, getting up and working or whatever. But you have to. You got a kid that depends on you, you know. And those are lessons you learn from sports and taking a hit and coming back, losing and coming back. So having said all of that, you can learn all of that without cutting weight.
Oh, yeah, man. Yeah, indeed, you can. How to lose, that is such an important skill set. Everybody needs to have that experience to learn how to lose. So many people don't.
That's a problem in Asia, though. It's a real problem in Asia, especially China, because you can't. It's a culture that doesn't tolerate any mistakes. It's really weird. Like compare China and Japan. Japan's a culture where people, no matter what it is that they do, they dedicate themselves to it to such a degree that they couldn't possibly make a mistake.
Yeah.
Whereas China, you can't make a mistake because then you lose face. But then everybody is just like so undisciplined and you know, slipshod.
We love to idolize the undefeated in combat sports. But I love the example of Gary Tonin, I think it was him. You know, a fantastic submission artist who's, I don't remember what his record is. He wins most of the time, if not all of the time, when he competes in submission grappling. But he gave this interview where he said, I tap out at least 20 times a day every training session.
Right. Which you absolutely want to be doing, because that means you're training with people that are better than you. It means you're taking chances.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'd say one of the reasons he's so good is because he knows how to lose, even though we don't see that aspect of him in the public.
Yeah. Yeah, like one of the problems I have with learning jiu-jitsu, right? I really have trouble learning jiu-jitsu. I've had a lot of problems with it. But one of the things that I know I do that's terrible, right? Like I have a phenomenal side control. Okay, like I'll just say it publicly. I'm on the radio and I'll say it. If I can, most people, if I get them inside, they can't get out. But that's not jiu-jitsu. And I'm not learning anything by holding you in side control. Right? And I know this, but that's the mistake that a lot of guys make. And go in the gym, he's got a great side control. So he side controls you. Okay, but then what?
I see that a lot. I'll give you a couple of hints right here. Had this wrestler, a guy named Jomar. He's in a couple of my women's self-defense videos. Funny guy. But yeah, he wrestled in college and high school, and he's got a phenomenal side control too. Just a ton of pressure. Feels like there's a ton of bricks on you. But nothing was happening. He was like, well, what do I do from here? I can't catch anybody. I said, well, move, change your position, move to north-south, move to side control on the other side, change them out, change here, change there. It's like, well, why? They might get out. Like, because in an attempt to get out, they're going to expose themselves.
That's right. Something will avail itself. Yeah, that's true. I agree with that.
So you'll make some mistakes, and they will get out a few times, but you'll get used to that, and then you'll start seeing the holes.
And meanwhile, you're giving them a fair chance to train too, right?
Yeah.
Because if you just hold them in side control, nobody's learning anything. He's not learning anything either. I agree with you. Yeah, no, I really regret this Japanese guy who teaches jiu-jitsu in Malaysia, and then we were wrestling, and I put him in side control. First of all, I got the takedown every time.
Yeah.
And then I put him in side control, and then he goes, can do nothing. And looking back, like why didn't this is an old man? Why didn't I just let him do whatever he's going to do? I could have learned something he could have practiced, and instead I was like really being a jerk, right? Like I was just holding him inside control.
And at the same time, eventually you're gonna run into that phenomenal jiu-jitsu guy who is gonna get out of that side control.
Oh, I know. Oh, it's not eventually. I mean, it happens. No, let's say it happens all the time, right?
Yeah.
Like let's say 2 out of 10 guys can get out of it, and then what have you got? Then I've tried to do nothing. I've tried to learn nothing, and now I got submitted.
And then you're gonna ask yourself, well, how can I hold that guy down? And the secret is you move. It's the exact same thing.
I see
You
what you're
move.
saying.
You give him a different puzzle to solve. Because if you stay there in side control, you stay there like I'm going to hold him down for a minute. Within a minute, he's going to solve that problem.
Exactly.
But you give him a different problem. Move to north-south. Okay, he's now like, oh, I've got to use a different solution to figure this one out. And by the time he's figured that, boom, you're on the other side. It's like, oh, I've got to figure out a different puzzle. Then you give him a different puzzle to solve and a different one. Yeah, and you can flip-flop between 3-4 different positions over and over again and tie up really good grapplers that way and at the same time expose them to attacks.
Yeah, that's like I was telling the teacher that at Tiger Muay Thai, I go, if we start in standing, I go against a lot of people anyway. I'm probably going to get the takedown, probably going to get on top, probably going to be able to pin him. But then it's not over, right? And like you said, within a minute or in some time frame, they're going to get out, right? And then, so that's why you need to learn actual jiu-jitsu rather than just taking your wrestling into the jiu-jitsu gym.
Yeah. But then when you add the strikes into it, that's where it gets interesting.
Well, that's it. So for MMA, that position's fine.
Yeah.
Because then I'm just going to hit him, But, yeah, I really have trouble learning jiu-jitsu, and I don't know if it's going to be like maybe when I get older, or maybe I'll get injured and I can't fight the way I do now, and then jiu-jitsu will appeal to me. I think it'll happen when the time is right. So for some reason, it just hasn't been
It's one
right.
of those things that takes patience. Just be patient with the process.
Yeah.
Man,
And I have so much, like Matt Serra, like his gym is right next to my house, right? It's like 3 kilometers from my house, right? So and I have so much respect for Matt Serra, and I love him, and we come from the same background, and we got the same accent, and I just can't do it. And I always try and motivate myself, like, well, if Matt Serra can do it, I could do it. Or, that should motivate me to do it, but it doesn't. I just can't do it.
I tell you, one of my biggest regrets as a martial artist is not taking advantage of some of the training opportunities that I had. Like when I lived in Utah, I lived a hop, skip, and a jump away from Pedro Sauer's gym when he was there.
Oh, wow.
And, I've since trained with some of his students, but, man, in that time frame, I could have trained with the man, the myth, the legend himself.
Yeah.
And that would have been so invaluable. But, man, I remember friends of mine were like, "Hey, come with me. We'll go train with Pedro Sauer. He's awesome." And I was like, I don't feel like it right now. I would come up with some excuse, and now I'm like kicking myself, like, why not?
Yeah.
Man, that experience.
Yeah. I mean, it's hilarious that I live that close to Matt Serra, and I go to his place sometimes, but I just have trouble liking jiu-jitsu. I don't know. That's a shame. I wish there were catch wrestling gyms. That's the other thing. People ask me all the time, oh, I want to do MMA. Should I learn catch wrestling? I'm like, where are you going to learn catch wrestling?
Yeah.
There's like 2 catch wrestling gyms in the world. There's like the original one in Wiggum is still there. And then, I think Tony Ciccione has a place. Ciccione? I don't know. Yeah, I think he has a place in upstate New York. There's very few of them in the world.
Yeah, I mean, there are some guys who will advertise it on their label because it sounds cool or whatever, but it's not the same thing. It's not. Like, I love catch wrestling. I practice catch wrestling rules style grappling. I learn everything I can about it, but I'm not going to tell anybody, hey, my gym is a catch wrestling gym. It's not. It's an MMA club.
Yeah, I feel a little funny about that, too, because I do teach submissions, to the fighters and guys I'm training, whatever, and then they always ask me, is that jiu-jitsu? And I always say no, and then I feel funny saying it's catch wrestling because I've never actually learned catch wrestling. I've never trained with anybody, so for me to call it catch isn't really fair. I don't know what to say.
Yeah, it's when you don't come from, how can I put this? When I started training MMA fighters, I didn't call my grappling jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
Because it was, how can I put this? Some of my friends called it homeschool jiu-jitsu.
Right.
So we didn't wear the gi. We drew inspiration from all kinds of different sources that weren't jiu-jitsu. And, I trained wrestlers. We worked on the top game. And back then, the jiu-jitsu game was all about, the bottom game or whatever. And I didn't really have a name for my martial art, if you will. And I thought, like, well, I could goes that cheesy route they used to do in the 90s and come up with some stupid Asian sounding name and
Catch Jitsu.
Catch Jitsu, exactly. Like, and even Greg Jackson, the famous Greg Jackson, did that. He originally called his fighting style Gaido Jitsu.
Yeah.
Badly translated Japanese for the way of the street. But, you know, he's a legitimate coach, man. He's one of the best in the business of mixed martial arts.
Do you know what's funny? When UFC first started, the first 10 UFCs were on video for some reason, and nothing else was for like forever.
Yeah.
So I saw like the first 10 like 100 times. I just kept watching them over and over. And I still remember though, Pat Miletich, when he got in the ring and they said, oh, he's from Pat Miletich Innovative Fighting System.
Yeah.
And then what a PMIS or whatever that works out. But anyway, what was so funny was you had like Joe Do.
Yeah.
And guys had all these really crazy names for their thing. And I went,
SAFTA.
And SAFTA.
Scientific application of training something or other.
God, who was that?
Somebody
who lost every time, though. But he was in more than once.
He won his first fight by virtue of being a giant person fighting a small person. But, man, after that, SAFTA was no more.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was a big fat guy.
Yeah.
Like a big fat kid. Like a kid, though. He was
and he was like bunny hopping in the ring, like doing these weird skippy things and smashing into the other guy.
Remember, Moti Hornstein. And his thing had an acronym. It was like survival something. He was Israeli. He was from upstate New York, and he just got creamed. But
Pat Miletich.
But Pat Miletich gets in there, and I just remember telling my family, like as we were watching it, they go, "Oh yeah, these guys, they invent a martial art and they promote themselves to black belt." And I'm like, if I ever meet Pat Miletich, I want to tell him that story. I'm like, because I didn't know who he was, and I thought that's what it was, like Joe Sando.
It sounded like something goofy, right?
Yeah.
And it was in English, and we were taught in this narrative, it's only legitimate if it has an ancient Japanese or Chinese sounding name.
Well, and it had his own name. I mean, the Pat Miletich fighting system, and he's a black belt.
Right.
But actually, I don't know that he gets credit, and I don't know how true this is. Maybe, in my estimation, I think he may have been the first MMA coach.
Yeah.
I think he may have been the first person that actually taught MMA.
To actually coach MMA as its own sport.
Yeah. To develop a system and then teach MMA. He may have been. I don't know all the details, right?
If not the first, definitely one of the.
Yeah. The Lion's Den, the Shark Tank. There were some early ones, and then what's his name? Mark Coleman invented his own the Hammer House, and there were others. But I wonder if Pat Miletich really was the first person to like actually coach MMA.
Yeah. Man, he's like the godfather of so much of American mixed martial arts, if you will. Like, he trained Jeremy Horn, who ended up training like guys like Matt Hughes and a million other people.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, man. I don't know. I feel bad, because as you get older and you start seeing like your favorite movie stars when you were a kid are dying, like that's always sad. And sad seeing guys retire. Like Dan Henderson, like I love Dan Henderson, and he's just one of my biggest heroes. And when he lost to the rematch with Bisping, I just felt so sad, And then when he fought Cormier and he lost, and I love Cormier, but it just was sad for me because I think in a way, I think the reason we get sad about this is because it reminds us of our own mortality, right? I think that's part of it.
Oh man, absolutely.
I think it reminds us that we're also aging, but it's really sad.
This doesn't last forever.
Who just retired? I just saw Diego Sanchez.
Oh, really?
Win a fight from 2018.
Really?
Yeah, I think he's the only person from Ultimate Fighter 1 that's still fighting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he won.
I wonder what his sparring is like in the gym.
God, he's a nut.
Yeah.
And I say that in the nicest way. Yeah, he's a nut. I remember in season 2 there was a guy named. Forgot what his name was. He ate weird foods and he did like really weird like Jedi training and stuff. And Dana said, "Oh yeah, he's this season's Diego."
Jedi training, man. Compared to the average person, a well-trained fighter in a contest of hand-to-hand combat is like a Jedi master or a Sith Lord by comparison, man. It's
yeah. But I honestly, and I don't know if we could prove this mathematically, but I just feel like an untrained fighter against a grappler is actually an even bigger mismatch than an untrained fighter against a really good striker.
Yeah.
And I think that because even street fighters, you know, and just normal people, right, they have some concept of how to throw a punch or a kick, and even though they're not doing it at world-class level, but they have some concept of how to throw a punch, but they don't have any concept of how to grapple.
Oh, yeah. And there's this, they're probably, if those guys have listened this far, they probably haven't because they're not very patient people. But people on the internet, anytime you mention the idea of grappling in the context of a street fight, they will always say, no, you must not, because you might have friends that will jump you.
Ridiculous.
But the thing is, you will probably be aware of whether or not that's even a possibility within moments of the altercation. You will see, are there other people here? Yes or no? Okay, a little bit of situational awareness goes a long way.
Yeah, but it starts with a guy on the internet saying that he can beat me, and the reason he can beat me is because I'm a trained fighter and he's not. All right? So that's like idiotic. Then it's like, well,
'cause you have all those pesky rules get in the way that are going to hold you back. So
and I've written, like, there's people that, like, I've written them for months. I'm like, well, today in training I did this. Bam. I go, would it have been better if we'd done that on concrete rather than on a mat? I don't understand how this is going to benefit you. So then it starts how it starts. And the next one is, but, you know, if he has friends, you know, and if they're armed, I'm like, where do you live?
I know, right?
There's these armed bands of thugs, like
everybody out there on internet land lives in a war zone, basically.
They live in some post-apocalyptic video game. So, like all these arguments about that are just ridiculous. Like, for me, the question is, can you, with no training, you know, beat a guy with training? No, you cannot. Would it benefit you to fight him on the street versus the mat? Only if you feel getting body slammed on concrete is an advantage. Like, I just don't see it. So I had a street fight a couple of weeks ago, and I've had very few since I've been in Asia, but I did. I had a street fight a few weeks ago, and it just confirmed all of this. You know, I grabbed the, you know, I grabbed the guy in one of those catch things that I don't know the name of, slammed him on his head on a wooden floor, and as it was happening, I was going, "Oh, thank God we're not on mats." Like what? This guy's winning now, you know. But we'll tell you what's funny, because I wrote about it. I'll probably publish this as an article at some point. But one of the weird things about, I've had very few street fights, but the few that I've had, because people always say to you, "Oh, those pesky rules are going to get in the way." Why? Because I'm going to stop and take a break every 3 minutes. Like, no, the rules don't get in the way. But you know what does get in the way? This is really weird. So I take this guy down, I smash him, I roll him on his back, and I neck crank him because it's like one of my things. And then I went, now what?
Yeah.
There's no referee. Nobody stopped in to stop the fight.
Yeah, like, what now? Do you kill him? Or?
What am I going to kill him? And you know what? And if I released him, he's not an honorable man. He's not going to say, you know what, you beat me fair and square.
Yeah.
You release me, I'm not going to, you know, jump you the second you try and stand up. I'm like, what am I going to do? You know? And then I rolled him and I put him in another submission. And at one point I had him in an arm submission. I'm like, what, am I going to break his arm? Like, I don't want to break somebody's arm.
That's where strangulation techniques come in really handy.
I guess that's
choke him unconscious.
You have to put him unconscious. But, man, and they won't tap. Like, that was the other thing. Like, they're such jerks that, like, they won't tap. Like the guy's eyes. Like, I got him in a submission, and his eyes were, like, ready to pop out of his head. And I'm like, would you please just tap and let's stop this nonsense. You know, it's so weird. I want no part of anything to do with the street fight. Like, it doesn't interest me. I don't want it, you know.
Indeed, man. I get so many questions about street fights on my channel, and I'm always very clear with my viewers. I'm not about street fights. Don't get into street fights.
Don't get into street fights. Most of the time you can walk away.
And I don't conflate that term with self-defense.
Yeah.
A street fight is two guys getting mad at each other for some reason and going at it.
Yeah.
Self-defense situation is defending yourself against an assault or an aggravated assault. It's a different thing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm totally against it. And the other thing is when guys tell me that they've had street fights, so they're going to win, you know, in MMA, I'm like, you know, when you fight in the street, number one, you're fighting guys that have no training. You're fighting guys who maybe didn't even know they were going to fight that day. It's very different than a guy that's been mentally preparing.
Those fights lasted 10 to 30 seconds.
10 to 30 seconds. They're wearing jeans.
Yeah.
And they're often drunk or on drugs.
Yeah.
So you beat that guy? That doesn't translate to anything in my world.
Oh, man. Yeah. And man, if those guys boasting like street fighting records, I've had 100 street fights, and the thing is, if there's any truth to that, that guy started those fights.
Yeah.
That guy's the jerk that made that happen, man.
That's true. That's a good point, too.
It wasn't ninjas jumping out of the shadows making it happen.
That's a good point, too. Yeah. I mean, like, in the whole time I've been in Asia, almost 20 years, you know, maybe I've had like 4 times where I fought outside of the, well, let's say that, like a street fight type. Yeah. Because I've had a lot of times, particularly when I used to live in Cambodia, and particularly in my early years in Asia, a lot of times that guys like challenge you.
Yeah.
Like a challenge fight, but that's not really a street fight. That's a challenge fight.
Yeah.
You know, specifically, you know, you do martial arts. You know.
Now, you mentioned being challenged because of that TV show you did.
Yeah,
What was that show called again? For
Martial Arts Odyssey.
Martial Arts Odyssey.
Martial Arts Odyssey. Yeah. And then I did, you know, I wrote episodes for, and I did Human Weapon.
Yeah.
The Fight Quest.
Oh, yeah.
I've done quite a few. And I worked, with Discovery for a while and History Show. I mean, just writing shows. And
I've talked to a few people like YouTubers out there who do martial arts, and almost all of them have been challenged to like, fights to the death and whatnot, because anytime you present this idea, I know something about fighting, people challenge you on that.
Yep.
And it's like the only profession in the world where that's true. If you come out there and say, I'm a really good, I'm a great plumber, nobody's like, I challenge you to a contest of unstopping drains or...
Yeah, and the thing is, though, when you come from an MMA background, MMA/wrestling, right? Like you got excited because I told you a better way to make yourself vomit.
Yeah.
And like, you're constantly looking for that challenge. And so, like, when you have an MMA gym and a guy walks in and he goes, "I'm a sambo expert," you're like, "Wow!" Like you're so excited to wrestle with that guy. I want to see what a sambo guy is like, you know, or a judo guy.
Something about his setups for leg locks or whatever.
Yeah, you know, whatever it is, even like this, what's the thing Chuck Liddell used to do before he was a kickboxer, that Kempo. Yeah. Like if a Kempo guy came, I would go, wow, I never had one of those. Let's go. You know, this is awesome. You know, and that's your attitude, you know, about other martial art. You want to see it. You want to experience it. So when I get challenged by street fighters and they tell me that I beat like 100 guys, I'm like, Jesus, this is going to be awesome. Let's do this. Let's film this, you know, and then they always back out. So they had 100 fights, but not the one with me. But, and I'm always so excited about it. I'm like, wow, what would that be like? Like this guy who's had 100 street fights and he beat everybody. That would be very challenging for me. You know, I'd like to experience that.
Yeah. Man, I had this Chinese student who came to my gym a number of years ago, and every time I would teach a lesson, teach a technique, he would interrupt and say, well, if you did that to me, I would just hit you in the groin. I would just poke you in the eyes. And this happens so much. And I was way too patient with him. Eventually, I'm a really patient person. I don't get mad very often, but I got mad. And I said, all right, try it. He's like, what? You want to try it? Poke me in the eye, kick me in the groin, whatever you want to do, no rules, let's go. He was like, I mean, he got in there and he's like, oh, okay, really nervous. And I just grab him, put him on the floor, choke him. That was it. I said, well, why didn't you do any of those things?
Yeah.
He's like, I couldn't. I'm like, exactly.
Well, the thing is, like, so these street fighters always say that to me. Like, oh, those pesky rules get in the way. I'm like, let's look at the rules. The 3 things that would probably come up in a street fight would be kick in the groin. But men almost never kick men in the groin. Statistically, it just doesn't happen.
Or pulling hair.
And then the other one is pulling hair. Yeah, good one.
If you watch
and the other
women
one is
fighting, they will pull hair.
Women pull hair.
Men don't do it.
Men don't do it. And then the other one is biting. Men don't generally bite. I don't find it hard to believe, though, that if you had somebody in a submission and the only thing they could do is bite you, like they would, like because some of the submissions where maybe you got your chest across their face or something, and they maybe that could come up. But as a rule, men don't kick each other in the nuts, so that's just not going to happen. Men don't pull hair. And if they did, so what? You would just fight. So, okay, good. You pull my hair.
Yeah, the groin kick, it's not an off button.
Yeah, it's not an off button. And the biting, probably not an off button. So then what else? You're not allowed to do 12 to 6 elbows.
Well, that's such a bizarre rule, man.
Which I don't know that comes up in street fights. And the other one is you're not allowed to intentionally direct the head at the ground when you pile drive.
So many pile drivers in street fights out there.
Yeah, and I always ask these alleged street fighters. I always ask them that. I go, well, which rule specifically do you want to
It's the no foul language rule. No unsportsmanlike conduct. No grabbing your opponent's gloves in between the straps.
No small joint manipulations.
Yes, man.
And that's the other one, like small joint manipulations. Do you know why you can't do that in MMA? Because they found out that guys who train all the time and they're subjecting their bodies to freaking horrible torture on a daily basis for a living, when you break their index finger, they just keep fighting.
Yeah.
So it doesn't change the outcome of the fight. But now the guy's got a broken index finger. And it's got to, so that's why they don't allow it. Because it wouldn't, which is also like the elbows. Like
fighters break their hands all the time in fighting.
Yeah.
And they keep doing it. Like, Kyle, that dude, I think for the last 2 years has had a broken hand and he just keeps fighting on the thing. So, man.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what these street fight, and I keep trying to get one of these guys to fight me, and then we'll film it, and then they always back out. And the thing is that in Cambodia and in Malaysia, I'm very close with the MMA organizations. They actually agreed to sanction some of these fights, like the YouTube Warrior, versus the Monk, as a sanctioned MMA fight on TV. I even had people put up money that they would have got money, and these guys always back down. I was supposed to fly to Cambodia a couple of weeks ago and fight a guy, and we were both going to get paid, and it was going to be on TV, and he backed out.
Oh man, it's a shame though. It's a shame, man. Everybody on the internet apparently wants me to fight Master Wong right now because
I would love to fight Master Wong.
Oh man, that would be amazing. That would be amazing. But everybody on the internet is like, you should fight Master Wong because you made a video where you tried out his crappy rear naked choke and it didn't work.
Oh,
so you need to fight to prove that it does or
he's
whatever.
A symptom, man. He's no, not a symptom. He's like a cause of the disease. He's like one of these guys that gets on there and convinces people of ridiculous things. I loved that video though, and I love that thing. If somebody grabs you from behind, you sit down, and it's like the worst thing in the world you could possibly do because then they're just gonna swarm you. But I love the self-defense video, or the one where she does the way you release the rear naked choke is by hitting your elbow against
their hip bone,
the hardest
with
part
the slot machine elbow technique. And she's got all these crazy names, like Eddie Bravo would be proud of her crazy names. The slot machine, the air guitar, whatever it was called.
The air guitar. I love Eddie Bravo was on Joe Rogan recently, and he said that he wants to learn kickboxing now.
Oh, yeah.
And it was pretty funny. He goes, I've been watching some real fights. And he seemed really concerned. He's like, I've been watching some street fights on YouTube. And I'm thinking, man, jiu-jitsu is not really the way to go. It was pretty funny.
Suddenly his empire crumbles. Oh, man. Eddie Bravo, though, he keeps it real.
He does.
I like his attitude because he was the first guy who I heard admit openly, my rubber guard system is awesome unless you were fighting somebody 30% bigger or stronger than you, in which case it's not going to work so well.
Yep.
And when I heard Eddie Bravo himself say that, and a lot of his students would never say that because they'd feel like, oh, I'm disrespecting the system, disrespecting my coach, disrespecting my non-existent belt because we don't wear belts in 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu. But Eddie Bravo himself said that, and that was cool. That was really cool to hear.
Yeah.
Hear him be that open and not dogmatic.
Yeah. I don't know. A lot of these guys because the question I always get is like if the combination men, like the guys who did boxing and catch in the old days, or the old catch wrestlers, or the old jiu-jitsu guys in Brazil that were fighting all comers, how would they do today? And the thing is, they fought a lot of people who just didn't know anything.
Yeah. Oh, man.
In the 80s, 70s, and 80s, when I used to fight, there were a lot of people who, they were taking martial art that, wasn't even as good as what you're seeing on the internet. And they thought they were lethal killers because there was no, and they would get in the ring. And I still remember, guys would show up to fight us, and my coach would say to them, listen, you have to understand this is real. We really fight. They're like, oh, I know, and I'm going to kick your butt, Bubba. He's like, you don't understand, we punch in the face. And they were like, oh, and then you get in there and you punch them one time, and they would cower because they've never been hit.
Man, anger, it puts you into a cage, it doesn't get you out.
Yeah.
Man. But it makes people feel like they're the Incredible Hulk for that
For like a
small
second.
duration up until the fight actually happens. In which case, there's that rude awakening. Wait, sorry, I don't actually know what I'm doing here.
Which is the other point that I always make about professional fighters or sport fighters versus street fighters. I go, street fighter, you were probably angry. Somebody pushed you until you got angry enough to fight.
Yeah.
When I fight or you fight professionally, we get in a cage with a guy that we don't know from a hole in the wall.
Yeah.
He's never said anything bad about my family.
No emotion.
No emotion.
On any given day, you could be best friends with that guy.
And you hold him down. And you probably will be.
Yeah. You'll
right?
hug it out afterwards.
You hug it out afterwards. In Malaysia, do you know how many of my opponents came to be my students? Like, that happen all the time. They come to be my student. Or their writings being still, I get guys, most of them have retired now, but like, let's say until, a couple of years, still writing to me, showing me their fights. Look, I've improved. Look at my approval, meant something to this guy. Like, yeah, you've improved a lot. I'm really proud of you.
Cool.
But that's
first guy that knocked me out, I went and trained with that guy.
Yeah.
I went and trained with that guy until I learned how to win fights, man.
Yep. And that's it. And, street fighting, they're angry, they're going on adrenaline and all this. And I'm like, dude, you don't understand. We are people who can we turn it on, turn it on. That's the opponent, you just fight him. That's scary in a way. That's a scary mentality. I mean, that's like a hired killer, except that you're not killing anybody.
Indeed.
When I was in
all
India,
those pesky rules, man.
When I was in India wrestling last year, so one of the top wrestlers in India, like, he got injured. He pulled or tore a groin muscle, and they didn't know if it was going to recover. And he was poised to make a lot of money. That was going to be his big money year. And they came to me and they said, "Listen, there's recruiters for MMA in India, and they're trying to recruit the wrestlers." And they go, "Do you think maybe that might be a way for him to make money, that he should change to MMA?" And the wrestlers in India remind me a lot of the Muay Thai fighters in Thailand. Like, they have 1,000 fights by the time they're 16.
Yeah.
They have no attitude. They have no feeling. They're not. I mean, they're nice. I mean, they're nice people and they're polite. But I mean, they would never get angry at somebody. I don't even know if they would defend themselves in a street fight. Like they're just like. I don't know that they would even make a connection between what they're doing and a street fight. Like, I don't know that they would even. Like, they're just nice people, and fighting is just their way of life. And I go, I don't know that you could be an MMA fighter.
Yeah.
To that guy,
That is interesting. You mentioned that. A lot of times I'll make a technique video, put it up on YouTube. Like, here's something you can do in jiu-jitsu. And I'm just thinking, like, all right, this is a jiu-jitsu thing. Then all of a sudden I'll get a bunch of comments like, but would that work in the street? I'm like,
everything works everywhere.
Forget the street. Why are we talking about the street? This is jiu-jitsu.
First of all,
how can you not separate that in your mind? Like, you can do martial arts independently of the street.
The street. I know, but even so, right? So I did an article for a magazine. It was pretty funny. It was like why all the techniques work on the street, and it was like Newton's law, like force meets force, whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, it only works in the gym. This particular throw only works in gyms.
Indeed. If you punch somebody in the face in the wrong place, and by that I mean in the gym versus in the street,
right, exactly.
Suddenly that 900 pounds of pressure per square inch no longer matters.
So, like who punches better? Like a guy that trains punching all day, or a guy that has, this is the other thing, the street fighter. How many street fights per year does he have? Right? Yeah. Like a handful. So who punches better, him or a professional fighter? Professional fighter. Oh, but who punches better with gloves off? Professional fighter. Doesn't change. Doesn't change. Oh, but you could break your hand. You both could break your hand.
Yeah. The question is, who's going to keep fighting when the hand's broken?
Keep fighting with a broken hand.
Probably the guy who's done it before.
I just read this book. I just gave it to Jordan, in fact. I just read this book about, it's like the first novel written about catch wrestling. It's really good. But so there was this catch wrestling, and a lot of it's loosely based on real things. And one of them was that Hackenschmidt, when Hackenschmidt fought Frank Gotch, Frank Gotch beat Hackenschmidt. Then they had a rematch, and it was like an epic battle. They had a rematch, and Frank Gotch won in like what at that time was considered too fast, like 20 minutes or something, or 3 hours or whatever was considered too fast at that time.
These matches used to be long, man.
Yeah. I mean, there was a title fight that went 12 hours once, and there was one that went 8 hours. But anyway, and there was always this thing that Hackenschmidt had an injured knee and then had someone paid his training partner to break his knee, right? So in this novel that someone wrote about it, so the guy that was the main character, there was controversy, had he thrown this fight when he lost the title and all this. So later, the mafia guys who were behind all the illegal betting and all that, they were talking to his wife, and the wife said something like, oh, my husband has said a lot of, negative things about you guys, and, you've never killed him. Why is that? And they go, the controversy about your husband throwing that fight. We paid him to throw that fight. She's like, I knew it. Everybody knew it. And she goes, so he faked the broken knee. They said, no. He took the money we gave him and he paid somebody to break his knee so he wouldn't have to lie. And they said that when they saw him do that, he became the scariest person that they'd ever, they were afraid of him after that.
Wow.
Like, what kind of person?
To break his own knee.
Yeah, he hired a sparring partner to intentionally break his knee so he wouldn't have to lie when he went in the championship fight.
That is nuts. Crazy awesome, though, man. I love those old catch wrestler stories. Man. Okay. Oh, man. In the interest of time, we're going on 3 hours and 38 minutes and 2 seconds.
I am talked out.
And my wife is probably wondering where I am.
These are all the things I know. I don't know other things.
Nah, that's cool, man. But, man, Antonio, I appreciate you coming out for the podcast today, number 13 and 14.
Am I the first person to do 2 podcasts?
You were the first one to do 2 podcasts in one day. Fantastic. Well, great conversation. Thank you for being here. And
thank you so much, Ramsey Dewey.
Next time you're in town, please let me know.
Cool, man. Cool, and I'd like to come train with you as well. If all those pesky rules don't get in the way.
Exactly. Spitting and foul language will allow it all.
12 to 6 elbows. We'll go nuts with it.
Exactly. All right, guys, out there in internet land, thank you for watching. Get out there and train.
Train hard. Thanks, Ramsey Dewey. I thought it was running long. I wasn't sure.